Chapter 833. Cameron described the picture in his imagination, and his tone was full of longing. The girl sitting next to Eric smiled and poured cold water on him. But it must be very expensive. Oh, Drew. Cameron shook his head and pointed to Eric. Your problem is not a problem at all for this guy. Of course, money is not a problem. The screening channel is the problem, Eric said to Cameron with a smile. If you make Spider-Man into the 3D IMAX format according to your idea, then you will find that you can't find a cinema chain that can play this movie. Eric's words were like a basin of cold water. Cameron also woke up and remembered what Stan Winston said. The 3D IMAX screen used for testing in Firefly Studios was definitely one of the few in the world, even if it was not the first one in the world. However, when he thought of the 3D IMAX screen, Cameron immediately understood. He looked at Eric and said, "You guy, I was almost fooled by you. Since the 3D IMAX screen appeared here, you must have a plan in mind, right?" Of course, Eric did not keep him in suspense and said, "Firefly Software has even begun to secretly develop professional tools and software for 2D to 3D technology. As long as the time is right, the digital field will set up a special 3D conversion branch to bring classic Hollywood movies that are suitable for 3D conversion to the big screen." Strictly speaking, 2D to 3D technology had now appeared. If it were not for Titanic in advance, Cameron should have produced a 3D version of Terminator 2, according to the timeline of the original spacetime. However, the current 2D to 3D technology could only be described as rough, and it was impossible to achieve large-scale commercialization. Eric witnessed with his own eyes the whole process of this emerging film technology, which originally had great development prospects, being played by the industry because of the proliferation of all kinds of pseudo-3D in the original spacetime. Since he now had enough influence and right to speak in Hollywood, he certainly hoped that the relevant technology could develop more maturely to achieve the benign development of this industry. Cameron asked, "Hey Eric, don't be so vague. How long will it take? Is 3 years enough? The production cycle of Spider-Man happens to be 3 years. Jim, you have to understand that if we want to promote 3D movies on a large scale, and even further 3D IMAX, we will face a large-scale upgrade of the entire industrial chain. From the development of the basic 3D camera to the upgrade of the final cinema equipment. Any of these links can't be achieved overnight. I think it should take at least 5 years to see the initial results. So, wait for your next movie to consider this kind of thing again." In fact, it was not impossible to forcibly accelerate this process, but this was not in line with Eric's expansion plan for Firefly. Eric had learned a theory from Buffett, which was to accumulate strength when the economic situation was good and seek expansion when the economic environment was bad. In recent years, the economic situation in North America happened to be the best. Not to mention the rapid development of the IT industry, even in Hollywood, because of the vigorous development of the global film market, the further expansion of the video/DVD industry, and the cable television industry. The average annual growth rate of the Hollywood film industry was far more than 10%. Eric knew that the current good development environment of Hollywood would enter a period of downturn around the year 2000 with the bursting of the dot-com bubble. At that time, it would be the best time for Firefly to further expand. Eric used Clover Holdings' investment plan in NASDAQ IT stocks to accumulate funds for the further expansion of Firefly Group after the year 2000. With the current scale of Firefly Group, hundreds of millions of dollars of small-scale mergers could no longer be called expansion. If they could take advantage of the dot-com bubble to accumulate $20 to $30 billion of cash reserves, then when Firefly Group entered new industries or sought merger targets, they could pay as little equity as possible, or even not use the stock exchange model at all. Cameron obviously didn't think of these large-scale industrial development plans. He just felt it was a pity. Under other circumstances, Cameron might delay the production of Spider-Man for a few years. He could afford to wait. However, he had already promised Eric this project. Although he was under a lot of pressure on the Titanic project, Cameron also knew that Eric was under no less pressure than him, because Eric spared no effort to support the project. If Titanic failed at the box office, the management of Firefly Group might lose their trust in Eric. Eric gave him so much support. As a person of character, He would not let Eric down. Everyone talked about 3 Dimax again. Eric felt a little thirsty. He took a few sips of coffee and asked casually, "Jim, what about you? What have you been busy with recently?" The Spider-Man project would not start until at least the second half of this year. Cameron did not need to worry about the Oscar PR for Titanic. As for whether he wanted to go to Europe or Japan to participate in the next stage of the Titanic promotional activities, it was completely up to him. Cameron should be very leisurely during this time. Cameron said, "It's nothing. I'm not a workaholic like you." "Oh yes, I thought of a good idea. When the idea matures, I'll bring it out. Maybe Firefly is willing to make it into a movie." Eric was interested and said, "Tell me, maybe we can come up with some ideas together." Cameron did not hide it and said straightforwardly, "It's a sci-fi script. It's about a girl who escapes from a cyborg base after the world suffers a global disaster. Now it's just a simple background setting. I'm still thinking about what this global disaster should be. Of course it's a nuclear war," Drew said from the side. Eric immediately remembered what Cameron's idea was. He smiled and said, "If it's a nuclear war, then there won't be many living people on Earth. A large-scale nuclear war, the residual strong radiation is enough to make the world uninhabitable for decades." "That's true," Stan Winston also said. "Moreover, after a nuclear war, it should be followed by a nuclear winter. The radiation clouds will block out the sun, and the surface temperature of the Earth may even drop below zero. Even if humans can survive the war and have the means to isolate the radiation, because of the nuclear winter, a large number of animals and plants will die. Humans will also die due to the lack of food." "I think so too," Cameron said. "So a nuclear war is not suitable at all. It'll be a post-apocalyptic era. What I want is a chaotic era after a large-scale global disaster. Humans may die in large numbers, and cities will be abandoned on a large scale, but the living environment on Earth will not become too bad." "Don't you like Japanese comics?" Eric listened to Cameron's words and pretended to say casually, "If that's the case, you should know that in many Japanese sci-fi comics, there's a special global attack method that will cause a large-scale malfunction of electronic equipment on a global scale." Cameron immediately understood. "You mean an electromagnetic wave attack?" Eric nodded. "Electromagnetic wave weapons are still in the experimental stage. However, according to your idea, I'm guessing that you've chosen a time in the future. At that time, electromagnetic wave weapons should be mature, and humans will be more dependent on electronic equipment. Then, once these equipment are attacked, it will definitely cause social chaos on a global scale. Think about it, if there's a global blackout now, the consequences will be disastrous." "Yes, that's it." Cameron clapped his hands, and his thoughts immediately cleared up. He said, "We can even set up a more complete worldview for this story. A turbulent era, a martial law society, and civilians struggling to survive at the bottom. Yes, and after this disaster, an even bigger conspiracy will be hatched. Therefore, the female lead in the story should be the link that connects all of this." Eric continued, "However, according to this setting, I think this idea should be more suitable to be made into a TV series, not a movie." "This is not bad." Cameron did not insist. He said, "The girl in the story should be very kind, but also very powerful. At the same time, her personality should also have a very complicated side, like an angel living at the bottom of society. Yes, let's call her the Atonement Angel. What does everyone think?" "Very good." Eric smiled and nodded. He said, "The Atonement Angel of the Apocalypse." "Yes, the Atonement Angel of the Apocalypse." Cameron said, "Let's call it that. I'll come up with the setting in the meantime. Eric, if Firefly is interested, prepare a scriptwriter team for me." Eric nodded. The Atonement Angel of the Apocalypse. Although in history, this classic American sci-fi TV series was axed after only 2 seasons, that was not because of the TV series itself. Until many years later, sci-fi fans were still obsessed with the follow-up story of the Atonement Angel of the Apocalypse. "Jim, I can help you prepare a scriptwriter team. However, I have a request." "What is it?" Cameron asked curiously. Eric smiled and said, "I'll still choose the female lead. I don't trust your aesthetic standards. Everyone burst into laughter. Cameron shrugged and said, "All right, it's up to you. However, I'm still very satisfied with the female lead of Titanic. This shows that our aesthetic standards should be similar." Oh, also, Eric suddenly remembered something and said, "This TV series is more in line with the tastes of young people. It's not suitable for broadcast on ABC. Coincidentally, Fox's The X-Files ended this year. If you're willing, perhaps you can let this movie take over the slot of The X-Files." "That's your business," Cameron said. "I don't care about the distribution of the movie. Even if you directly let Fox produce it, I don't care." Eric nodded and smiled. "Then I'll directly get the scriptwriter team of The X-Files to contact you. They happen to have a lot of experience in writing sci-fi scripts. Apocalypse Angel is an accident, and Cameron's focus will still be on Spider-Man. He will not be the producer like the original Spacetime, and Eric decided to let Fox take over this project. After The X-Files ends, Fox needs a new sci-fi TV series to fill the slot. Because of the influence of Titanic, Fox is very concerned about Apocalypse Angel, and the project is in the early stages of preparation. Eric continued with the post-production of Casino Royale. At the same time, outside of Hollywood, after months of preparation, Soros's Quantum Fund started their first wave of attacks on Southeast Asian countries. The scale of this attack is not big, and Soros had been criticizing Southeast Asia's economy since last year. This had made the Southeast Asian countries wary. In the first 2-week attack, the international hot money did not gain any advantage. Instead, they lost hundreds of millions of USD in the Thai baht trade war. Although these hundreds of millions of dollars did not have any substantial impact on the huge amount of international hot money, it strengthened the confidence of the Southeast Asian countries that they had enough strength to resist the attacks of international currency speculators on their currencies. While the Southeast Asian countries are promoting the news of the international hot money's failure, they do not know that their opponents have already found out about them. What will happen next is the real storm. Eric does not want to let go of this opportunity. Since the beginning of the year, Chris had secretly set up a trading team in New York. After the international hot money's first attack, Chris flew from New York to Los Angeles to discuss the follow-up plan with Eric. It's mid-March. Malibu, Sharp Corner Manor. Chris and Eric had just finished their lunch, and they sat by the villa's glass wall to discuss this matter. Eric put down his coffee cup and said, "We had just tabulated the annual figures. The net profit for the year is about $1.76 billion US. After the dividends, we will get about $1.3 billion US. Yahoo will need to reserve $500 million US. And this is the biggest expense. Also, Firefly Electronics will need $200 million US. I had seen the investment report submitted by Bezos, and it will be another $100 million US. The other companies will also need to reserve $200 million US for emergencies. That's why you can only use $300 million US this time." Chapter 834. Based on the trend of the Nasdaq in the next few years, Eric's stock investment in the past 2 years could yield at least 5 times the profit if he cashed it out at the right time. After buying $2 billion in Nasdaq IT stocks last year, Eric planned to invest another $4 billion this year and next year while the Nasdaq index was below 2,000. He planned to cash out in batches after the Nasdaq index reached 3,000. Compared with this plan, the foreign exchange speculation in the Southeast Asian economic crisis could only yield less than twice the return after half a year of operation, which was not so cost-effective. If too much funds were placed on this matter, it would definitely delay the last opportunity to buy IT stocks at the right price. At the same time, Eric didn't want to make too much noise and be targeted by the Southeast Asian countries. Whether it was the Firefly Group or Firefly Investment, they would develop their business locally in the future. Therefore, he took out $300 million this time purely to make some pocket money. This girl wanted to buy a Boeing 777 for a long time. Chris also knew about Eric's situation, so he didn't think $300 million was too little. However, after a period of observation, Chris saw the Southeast Asian economic crisis as an opportunity. He said, I mortgaged part of my shares in the company and borrowed US $300 million from Chase Bank. Emily's family is also willing to take out US $100 million. Together, it's US $700 million. US $700 million. This number is quite coincidental, Eric said with a smile. Chris held 3% of Firefly Investments shares. According to the current scale of Firefly Investments assets, the value was more than US $1 billion. Chris also mentioned the mortgaging of shares to Eric in advance. Eric didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Even if Chris lost all US $300 million, the loss of 1% of shares wouldn't have any substantial impact on the Firefly Group. What's more, this was definitely a game where one could earn more than they could earn. As for the coincidence, it was because when Eric bet on the oil futures of the Kuwait War, the capital scale was about US $700 million. Chris immediately remembered the past. At that time, he and his father thought Eric was crazy, but the final result was enough to make people crazy. Chris smiled and said, this time we definitely won't be able to make such crazy profits. According to the information in my hands, after this probing attack, the international hot money will need 3 months to establish a short position. The next attack should be around July. In 3 months, everyone is rushing to build positions. Due to the competition, the leverage of our positions will only get lower and lower. In the end, it will be good if we can get double the profit. Although Chris had been busy with industrial investments in recent years, Eric could tell from this short conversation that Chris had not lost his professionalism as a top student in the finance department. In his memory, the Asian financial crisis officially broke out on a large scale in July. It doesn't matter how much we can earn back from this money. I'm more concerned about the impact of this matter on the federal economy, Eric continued. Once the Asian emerging economies are destroyed like the Latin American countries in the 1970s and 1980s, and the European economy has yet to recover, a large amount of hot money can only flow to the North American market. It's conceivable that the North American stock market will experience another super bull market. Chris nodded and thought for a while before he said, Eric, although I know you have a detailed plan, I still want to remind you not to hesitate when it's time to cash out. In my opinion, the Nasdaq market is already bubbling. Take Microsoft for example. Its annual net profit last year was only US $1 billion. But now its market value has risen to US $120 billion. This is too much of an overestimate. The North American stock market doesn't have a limit. If you let go too late, your US $6 billion investment will turn from a huge profit to a huge loss in one day. In my opinion, Microsoft's share price is far from the limit, Eric said. He then said seriously, but don't worry, Chris. You know I'm not the kind of person who will be blinded by greed. That's right. Chris nodded and suddenly laughed. Speaking of which, I attended Steve Forbes' family party last week and got some data from him about this year's Forbes billionaire list. Do you want to know how much money you have now? Forbes magazine usually publishes its annual Forbes billionaire list in March, and Eric is a subscriber to this magazine. He remembers this issue will be published next Monday. But before that, many financial media outlets are talking about the Forbes billionaire list. Even if Eric doesn't pay attention to it, he knows about it. Eric saw Chris keeping him in suspense and laughed. I'm curious. How much does Forbes estimate your net worth? $1 billion US. It's far from what you have. Chris shrugged, but he was already very satisfied. From the time he started as an ordinary analyst at Morgan Stanley until now, he had accumulated a net worth of more than $1 billion in 6 years. He was definitely the highest paid fund manager in North America. There are many large family investment funds similar to Firefly in North America. Although the managers of these funds have high salaries, very few of them can get shares. Moreover, Chris also knew that although Eric rarely took care of Firefly's investment, he would always be the key to Firefly's development. Chris was just an executor. Without Eric's sharp eyes to pick Cisco, AOL, Nokia, and other companies, and single-handedly lead the establishment of Yahoo, Firefly's investment would not have developed so quickly. Chris took a few sips of his coffee and said, "Never mind. You should read Forbes next week. I will leave you a surprise. It's time for me to go back." Today was Thursday, a working day. Chris actually flew over from San Francisco. Both of them were busy people, and Eric didn't urge him to stay. He was about to get up and send Chris off, but he saw that Chris didn't move. Instead, he took out an envelope from his handbag and handed it over. "What is this?" Eric asked curiously. Seeing that the envelope is not sealed, he opened it and found an invitation inside. It is a wedding invitation. Eric glanced at it and smiled. "You and Emily finally plan to get married?" "Yeah." Chris's slightly smiling face was a little awkward. He gestured with his hand and said, "My dad and Emily's parents have been urging us for a long time. The most important thing is, Emily is now more than a month pregnant." "Wow, congratulations, you are going to be a father." Eric looked at the invitation again and said, "May 20th, not a bad day. Where do you plan to hold the wedding?" "Maryland, Dad's farm," Chris said. He then said with a bit of bitterness, "You should know Emily's temper. After she found out she was pregnant, she has been angry with me this month. She said I delayed her work. However, we can't find a reason to delay it anymore. My dad and her parents won't agree. It's just a pre-wedding phobia. She will be fine after a while." Eric put away the invitation and asked, "How are the wedding preparations going? Also, who did you invite?" Chris said, "My dad and her parents are in charge of this. You know, they are retired and have a lot of time. As for the guests, you are the first to receive the invitation. We have not confirmed the specific guest list yet." Eric thought for a while and said, "If you don't object, why don't we use this opportunity to call everyone over for a gathering?" Chris was puzzled. Everyone. Cisco's John Chambers, AOL's Steve Case, Nokia's Yoma Alala, Yahoo's Ian Neer, and Firefly Group's Katzenberg, Frank Robert. Eric listed and said, "Usually, everyone doesn't have such an opportunity to get together. Your wedding happens to be an opportunity, just like last year's Yahoo Alliance conference. I have actually been thinking that everyone should gather once or twice a year. But isn't this a bit too ostentatious?" Chris was a little hesitant. According to Eric's idea, this should be a big gathering of the senior management of the Firefly Group. This gathering would definitely be more eye-catching than last year's Yahoo annual meeting. As a conglomerate that suddenly rose in the past 10 years and had a pivotal position in the industry, the gathering of the management of all the subsidiaries of the Firefly Group would definitely attract strong media attention. Eric joked, "This is a wedding. I think for you, this is definitely a once-in-a-lifetime event. The more lively, the better. Of course you can go back and discuss with Emily first. If you want to invite any Hollywood stars, feel free to tell me. I will invite them for you." "Then, okay, I will talk to Emily tonight, but forget about the stars." Chris did not refuse. He packed his briefcase, stood up, and said, "By the way, Emily and I won't specially send out invitations to Joan and the others. You can just bring them to Maryland. Of course, if you want to bring a few more, I won't object. Don't worry, I won't give you the chance to watch the show." Eric smiled and punched Chris's shoulder. The two chatted and laughed as they walked out of the villa side by side. After sending Chris to Santa Monica Airport, Eric went to Firefly Studios. After a closed test screening of Casino Royale, he discovered some details that needed to be adjusted. He had been busy with this recently. Eric worked until 7 o'clock in the afternoon when he got off work. There was a girl in the car, Christina Aguilera. There were a few scenes that involved Christina in the movie that needed to be adjusted. In the afternoon, the girl helped with the dubbing at the studio's post-production center. After Venice, the two did not find many opportunities to spend time together. Christina hinted a few times and waited patiently for Eric to get off work. When she did not leave, Eric did not hesitate to bring her back. After having dinner at a restaurant in Malibu, it was already past 8 o'clock when the two arrived home. The petite girl spared no effort in teasing Eric. The two were entangled on the big bed in the bedroom when Eric's phone unexpectedly rang. Letting go of Christina, Eric picked up the phone on the bedside table and glanced at it. It was Chris. After picking up the phone, Eric put on a pajamas and walked out. Eric would not deliberately be wary of the women around him. All he did was not give them the opportunity to make mistakes, which was good for everyone. It was already early in the morning in New York. For Chris to call at this time, it might be something important. Eric did not plan to let Christina hear it. After leaving the bedroom, Eric casually pushed open a small living room upstairs and walked all the way to the balcony. He leaned against the railing and spoke to Chris. Chris did not have anything important to say. He only talked about Eric's invitation to Firefly's management to attend his wedding. Emily had already agreed, so he called to inform Eric of her decision. Eric and Chris chatted for a while. In the end, the phone was transferred to Emily. They talked about some details. Eric hung up the phone and did not know whether to laugh or cry. At the same time, he sympathized with Chris. Chris had been flying around the East and West Coast for the past few days, and had just returned to New York. It was already so late, but he still had not rested. It seemed that Emily had tortured him quite a bit during this period. A woman with an accidental pregnancy and premarital phobia. Her personality was too domineering. TSK. Just thinking about it was scary. After hanging up the phone, Eric returned to the bedroom. He put the phone back on the bedside table and looked at the big bed. Christina's small body was softly sunk into the big bed. Her face was red and her eyes were glazed. She looked like a doll that had been played with too much. Although he knew that the girl was faking it, Eric was still aroused. He reached out and squeezed a little harder. With a soft moan, Christina's small body immediately curled up like a shrimp. However, she hugged Eric's big hand tightly in her arms. The light in her eyes became even more watery. Eric reached out and scooped the girl up. He laid down on the bed and smiled. "Here, sit up and move yourself." Perhaps it was because they had too much fun last night. Eric was actually woken up by Christina. The curtains around the bedroom were automatically opened. The bright sunlight surged in, making Eric cover his eyes. Christina was holding a newspaper in her hand. She was half lying next to Eric. There was a little excitement in her voice. "Eric, the latest box office for Titanic is out. The box office for a single week is $22 million, and the total box office is $469 million. It broke the record for Star Wars. Take a look." Chapter 836. The best place to hold a Titanic-themed exhibition was undoubtedly the Rosarito film set in Mexico. However, after the discussion, everyone agreed that this would not work at all. Not to mention the visa issue, most film fans would not travel across the country just to visit the filming location of a movie. What's more, the security of the Mexico-US border was also a big problem. Eric had deeply felt it during his trip to Mexico last year. If tourists were robbed, kidnapped, or even accidentally killed during their visit to the set of Titanic, Firefly would be in a very passive position. This kind of thing was very common in Mexico, where drug traffickers were entrenched and gangs were everywhere. Cameron's good friend, the Mexican director Guillermo del Toro, who was the first to recommend and assist him in building the Titanic set in Rosarito, had just made a name for himself in Hollywood when his old father in his hometown was immediately kidnapped. But Los Angeles was different. According to statistics, Los Angeles had more than 30 million tourists from all over the world every year in recent years. Los Angeles was the film holy land in the hearts of film fans all over the world. Most tourists who came to Los Angeles would basically visit movie-related attractions such as Universal Studios, Disney World, and so on. This provided a sufficient source of tourists for the Titanic-themed exhibition. After an afternoon of discussion, Eric finally decided to put the Titanic-themed exhibition in Los Angeles's Firefly Studios. The Titanic ship model built in Rosarito would also be dismantled and transported back to Los Angeles to be reassembled and refurbished. The interior would be opened up with exhibition halls, restaurants, and other areas for tourists to have a better experience. Although this would cost a lot of money, compared to the huge profits that Titanic would bring to Firefly, the money was not worth mentioning. Back then, Eric had bought 100 hectares of land in Playa Vista at one time. Although the studio had expanded over the years, and more than half of the purchased land had been consumed, it was more than enough to open up an area for Titanic. As a legendary giant that was destined to be recorded in the world's film history, Titanic deserved such treatment. The group had a dedicated team that built and maintained several major Disneyland parks in the world, known as the Dream Engineers. After the plan was confirmed, the following work would be handled by this experienced team. In the course of the meeting, there was no shortage of senior executives of the group who proposed to imitate the model of Universal Studios and directly expand Firefly Studios into a tourist attraction. This proposal made Eric quite excited. However, if Disney's brand resources were not included, there were not many projects that Firefly had accumulated over the years that could provide sightseeing resources for the studio. It was not enough to support a theme park, so this plan could only be put aside for the time being. However, Titanic was undoubtedly a very good start. As long as it was successful, some of Firefly's next movie projects that were not suitable for Disneyland could be opened as attractions in Firefly Cineplex. After accumulating to a certain extent, it would be logical for Firefly Cineplex to transform into a tourist attraction. In order to finish Casino Royale as soon as possible, Eric didn't rest over the weekend. In the last 2 days, he finished the post-production of the film. Then he didn't need to worry too much about the rating of the film and the promotion work. In the new week, although Eric wanted to rest for a few days, the various tasks that came at him made it impossible for him to do so. On Sunday night, March 16th, FFM TV's meticulously produced Machida Family officially began airing. Eric had high expectations for this TV series. However, other than personally intervening in the selection of the male lead during the casting process and confirming James Gandolfini, he didn't intervene in any other aspects. Eric also instructed Wayne Stan to delegate as much power as possible to the main creator of the TV series, David Chase. The reason why Machida Family was rated as the #1 TV series in the original spacetime by many media outlets was that this movie completely broke the traditional TV series model and created a new and meticulous narrative model. If the management, who had a traditional production mindset, were to interfere, Machida Family would very likely fall into the traditional format and lose its original characteristics. Although there were some differences from the original, the main production concept was not changed at all. Therefore, after the first episode of Machida Family aired, it attracted the attention of many film critics. Entertainment Weekly directly gave it a near-perfect review and called Machida Family a TV series full of surprises. A famous film critic from the Boston Globe even gave a passionate review of the play. Machida Family is a brand new TV series that is surprisingly special. The male lead, Tony Soprano, is the leader of a gang in New Jersey. However, his gang is not as ostentatious as the Corleone family in The Godfather. It's just a small group of 5 or 6 people. Their daily work is to collect protection fees, and their biggest business is probably the strip club. In addition to this gray identity, he is also an ordinary middle-aged man who has encountered a midlife crisis. His 2 restless children, his neurotic mother, and his wife have all brought him all kinds of troubles, so he had no choice but to seek help from a psychiatrist. Therefore, from the characters in the film, it's almost impossible to find any highlights. However, this creative TV series is precisely under this ordinary appearance. It opens up a new progressive narrative mode for us. The narrative structure of the TV series is smooth and orderly. The scriptwriter's control of the plot structure can be described as perfect. Not only does it make people think about it repeatedly, but they also can't help but look forward to the next episode. Eric didn't know much about the process of Machida Family, from its premiere to its popularity. Therefore, he originally thought that the TV series would gradually reach its peak like Breaking Bad. However, the response after the first season of the TV series far exceeded Eric's expectations. During the call with Harvey, Wayne, and Stan, Eric asked Harvey if the media response was the result of his research. Harvey laughed and said no. At the same time, with the good publicity, the premiere of Machida Family generated a good viewership of 1.76 million, which was close to 40% of FFM's total subscribers. As a paid cable channel, every viewer of FFM was a valid subscriber. Plus, the show didn't have any advertisements, so there was no need to count the 18 to 49-year-old audience. The The good start of Machida Family almost immediately alerted their main competitor, HBO. In the new week, they once again announced that they would begin production of their own TV series. The reason why it was once again was mainly because although HBO also announced that they would begin production of their own TV series last year, due to Time Warner's slow execution efficiency, HBO still hadn't announced the official list of TV series projects until the premiere of Machida Family. Eric, of course, clearly remembered that HBO's first self-produced TV series was neither City on the Hill nor Machida Family. It was Prison, which wasn't very famous but was equally good. Since HBO's response was so slow, the project of Prison naturally wouldn't fall into HBO's hands. FFM had already bought the script at the beginning of the year. As long as Machida Family received a good response, the production of Prison would begin soon. During the weekend, although Eric went to work as usual, Christina didn't leave. She stayed in the Pointy Corner Manor. The girl, who originally planned to spend the weekend at the manor, heard the news and complained to Eric over the phone. Monday morning, Eric hung up the phone with Harvey Wayne and Stan and walked into the dining room to read today's newspaper. Christina was wearing a t-shirt and jeans that exposed her midriff. She had an apron around her waist that almost wrapped her petite body. She ran around like a bee and brought breakfast into the dining room. Then she sat across from Eric. However, the girl's expression was a little strange today. She looked like she was admiring or in awe. It made Eric feel a little strange. Eric took a sip of the hot milk beside him and asked half-jokingly, "Why are you suddenly looking at me like that? Or did you just realize how handsome I am today?" "No." Christina smiled and lowered her head to look at the stack of newspapers in front of Eric. She raised her hand, wanting to point at something, but was stunned for a moment. She stood up and said in confusion, "I remember now. I flipped through it in advance this morning. I should have left it on the sofa beside the curtain wall." Eric watched curiously as Christina ran out of the kitchen. Soon she came back with a magazine. It turned out to be this month's issue of Forbes. He just remembered that the new issue of Forbes was officially released today. Oh, this issue also had the 400 richest Americans list. No wonder the girl had that expression just now. Eric's net worth had reached $67.7 billion last year. Before this issue of Forbes was released, most financial media predicted that his net worth would exceed $80 billion this year. $80 billion for most people was quite shocking. This year, other than Firefly Group's steady growth, Cisco, Yahoo, AOL, and other companies under Firefly Group's investment had almost doubled their market value. For example, Cisco's market value last year was only about $10 billion. Based on the recent stock price, Cisco's market value had increased to $33.2 billion. AOL's market value was less than $10 billion last year, but it had also increased to $15.3 billion. Come, let me see how much money I have now. With a smile on his face, Eric took the magazine from Christina. Unsurprisingly, it was a close-up photo of him on the cover. After glancing at the title, Eric immediately widened his eyes in shock and said, "They really want to roast me on the fire." On the cover of the magazine, what surprised Eric the most was not the eye-catching figure of $98.7 billion, which was tens of billions more than most of the media's predictions. Instead, it was the very sensitive title used by Forbes below the number, "Rise of the Media Oligarchy." The word oligarchy was definitely not a compliment in the West. Although almost all of the capital forces had the ambition to become an industry oligarchy, even if they achieved this goal, very few people would publicize it with great fanfare. The so-called oligarchy, in the West's consciousness, also meant monopoly and exorbitant profits, as well as exploitation and oppression. Just like in the early 20th century, although the Rockefeller family created an unprecedented wealth myth, because of a series of bad practices such as using mercenaries to suppress minors, the Rockefeller family carried a bad reputation even 100 years later. Some of the descendants of the Rockefeller family, who wanted to participate in politics, were even caught by reporters and questioned. Do you still want to control the United States? Of course, even if they didn't care about their reputation. If they were associated with the word oligarchy, they would often face anti-monopoly investigations that all companies didn't want to face. This was the most troublesome thing. However, Eric soon found something strange. Forbes magazine used the title, Rise of the Media Oligarchy, instead of simply, Rise of the Oligarchy. There must be a big difference between the two. When Eric realized this, he quickly flipped open the magazine and found the relevant article. As we all know, in the course of a century of development, Hollywood film companies have always been in a state of rising heroes. Because of the strong uncertainty of the creative industry, it is difficult for a company to dominate the Hollywood industry. However, in recent years, with the federal government's gradual liberalization of the media industry, the major Hollywood film companies are no longer limited to the field of content production. Therefore, the originally relatively balanced situation is quickly being broken. In the new round of reshuffling of the media industry, the company with the strongest development momentum is undoubtedly the Firefly Group, which was established less than 10 years ago. Although the Firefly Group has not announced its financial report for the year 1996, based on a large amount of public information, it is not difficult to predict that the overall revenue of the Firefly Group for the year 1996 is likely to exceed the unprecedented figure of $30 billion. Even 5 years ago, there were very few companies in the media industry with annual revenue exceeding $10 billion. The explosive revenue of the Firefly Group is attributed to its repeated mergers and acquisitions since the 1990s. Although Time Warner, Viacom, and other media companies have no lack of corresponding mergers and acquisitions, only the Firefly Group, after consecutively acquiring companies such as New Line Cinema, Disney Group, Metro BC Group, and other companies, through Eric Williams's admirable forward-looking vision, and the company's powerful and efficient executive management team, the Firefly Group has perfectly achieved the rapid integration of different companies and the continuous rapid development of related businesses after the mergers. In contrast, Time Warner, which has lost Steve Ross, can almost be described as a plate of loose sand. Although Viacom's Sam Leisherdong is old and strong, he obviously lacks the keen judgment of the fast-developing media industry. After consecutively acquiring the Blockbuster video store chain and Paramount Pictures, Leisherdong, who is conservative in nature, did not carry out effective restructuring and integration of these two companies. Blockbuster's business has shown an obvious decline, and Paramount Pictures' film business has not improved. Theoretical analysis makes it difficult for people to see the differences between these three local media giants. However, the annual performance reports of the three companies can clearly show this point. According to the known information, we can find that in 1996, Time Warner's annual revenue was only $1 billion. For the whole year, it suffered a loss of $191 million. The poor performance led to the stock market value of Time Warner Group, which has $35 billion of fixed assets, to only $24.3 billion. Viacom's revenue in 1996 reached $12.1 billion, annual net profit of $1.2 billion, and market value of $28.8 billion. Although it has surpassed Time Warner to become the second largest media company in North America, the gap between it and the Firefly Group is quite obvious. Relying on the outstanding performance of its media network, film and television entertainment, theme parks, peripheral products, and special effects companies, the Firefly Group's annual revenue has reached $30 billion. Compared to the Firefly Group's average net profit of 11% in previous years, the Firefly Group's annual net profit should be around $3 billion. Because the Firefly Group's various businesses still maintain a strong momentum of growth, according to the standards of a listed company, the Firefly Group's market value should be $85 billion. Therefore, whether in terms of annual profit, revenue data, or market value, the Firefly Group has opened up a huge gap with its competitors in the industry, showing the trend of a dominant oligarch. Chapter 837. In addition to a detailed comparison of the financial data of Firefly, Time Warner, and Viacom, Forbes also used the example of the Big Three in the telecommunications industry as an example to prove its own point of view. In 1996, AT&T, the #1 telecommunications company in the United States, had a total annual revenue of more than $74 billion. The second and third companies, Verizon and Sprint, had a total annual revenue of only $30 billion, which was less than half of AT&T's. Although the gap between Firefly's revenue and Time Warner and Viacom's was not as large as the gap between AT&T and Verizon and Sprint, it clearly showed this trend. At the same time, Firefly's industrial layout was similar to AT&T's in many ways. AT&T itself was a diversified telecommunications industry giant. The industries it was involved in included fixed telephones, mobile communications, cable TV, communication software, electronic products, and so on. If it was compared to a single business, even if AT&T maintained its lead, it would not be able to leave its competitors far behind. But when all industries were combined, AT&T's strength far exceeded competitors like Verizon and Sprint. The current situation of Firefly Group was the same. In its television business, film, entertainment, and other sectors, Firefly did not maintain too much of a lead compared to its competitors in the same industry. However, when these businesses were integrated into a whole, it showed the aura of an oligarch that dominated the media industry. Eric sat in the dining room and patiently read all the articles about Firefly in this issue of Forbes magazine. When he came back to his senses, more than half an hour had passed. Christina was still sitting quietly across from him. She had already finished her breakfast and was just looking at him curiously. Looking at his watch, Eric smiled and said to Christina, "You still have a training session today, right? I'll get the driver to send you to Burbank." Although Eric's expression seemed relaxed, Christina did not forget the frown he had when he was reading Forbes. She was a girl who was very good at reading body language. Although she did not quite understand why Eric had such a reaction, she knew that he was not in the mood to deal with her at this time. She nodded obediently, put away the cutlery in front of her, and left the dining room with Eric. The two of them arrived at the villa together. The car was already parked at the entrance. After giving a few instructions to the driver, Eric kissed Christina on the cheek and sent her into the car. After returning to the restaurant, Eric quickly finished his breakfast and took another car to the Firefly headquarters in Burbank. On the way, he called his female assistant, Kelly, and asked her to pay attention to this issue of Forbes. The article published by Forbes magazine would definitely cause a heated discussion in the media for a period of time. Eric had been in the industry for many years, and he knew how serious the impact of the media's influence on some companies was. Therefore, he had to prepare some plans in advance to deal with the possible incidents. Since it was Monday, since Eric had rushed to the headquarters, he personally attended the company's weekly executive meeting. Before this, Kelly had attended on Eric's behalf most of the time. She would then organize the meeting minutes for him to review. During this period of time, the company's focus was still on the global release of Titanic. However, the spring TV series had all been broadcast on the major TV stations under the company. The head of the TV business in New York, Robert Iger, briefed everyone on the viewership of the series on ABC, AE, Disney Channel, and other TV channels through a video call. The viewership of ABC and Disney Channel was steadily increasing. Last fall, ABC's Dark Horse, Everybody Loves Raymond, returned after a winter break. The highest viewership had exceeded 22 million viewers. Led by iconic series such as City to Desire, Project Runway, and America's Next Top Model, AE Network's Lifetime TV station continued to release new premium series and continued to encroach on the female audience. Compared to the original average viewership of less than 1 million viewers during primetime, Lifetime TV station, under Annie Sweeney's excellent management, had an average viewership of 3.5 million viewers during the 12-hour primetime slot every week. The viewership of core series such as City to Desire had even broken the record of 8 million viewers for cable channels. This result made Lifetime TV station the most popular new star in the United States in recent years. As the final topic of discussion was the release and promotion of this year's Firefly film, the regular meeting lasted until 11 o'clock. The senior executives who were able to attend the group's weekly meeting definitely had access to information. When the meeting was over, everyone inevitably mentioned the Forbes magazine that had just been released today, and congratulated Eric seriously or jokingly. Of course, there was no lack of people who saw the impact that the Forbes magazine article might have on the Firefly Group and solemnly reminded Eric. Everyone left one after another. Katzenberg and Wales stayed behind as if they had a tacit understanding. They went to a small meeting room nearby with Eric. After the secretary served the coffee, Katzenberg sent the other party away and said, "Eric, I've already called Steve Forbes this morning. They shouldn't have used the word oligarch. It's a pity that we didn't anticipate this situation in advance." Katzenberg was obviously very clear about the possible impact that the Forbes magazine article that exaggerated the Firefly Group's rise of the media oligarch could have on the company. From Katzenberg's obviously angry expression, Eric could even guess that the hot-tempered Katzenberg and the head of the Forbes Group, Steve Forbes, definitely did not have a pleasant conversation. It was not impossible for the two sides to have a direct dispute. In this country, the president would be scolded by the media every 2 to 3 days. Although the Firefly Group already had a very strong influence in the media industry, it was impossible to control everyone's public opinion. After taking a sip of coffee, Katzenberg continued without waiting for Eric and Frank Wales to speak. "I'll talk to Robert in the afternoon and cut off the advertising budget for all media platforms under Forbes this summer. They can't do this kind of sudden attack just to get attention." It seemed that Katzenberg really had an argument with Steve Forbes in the morning, and it was quite intense. Eric smiled and shook his head. Just as he was about to say something, Frank Wales advised, "Jeffrey, if you do this, we'll really become the media oligarch that Forbes magazine said. I don't think the situation is so serious, so it's better not to fall out with them." Frank had always been the good cop within the group. Katzenberg also respected him. Hearing Frank's words, Katzenberg also calmed down. He knew that his idea was a little radical and had too many personal emotions, so he nodded slightly and turned to look at Eric. "Although we don't need to completely cut off the cooperation, we still have to show our attitude. Let Robert handle this," Eric said to Katzenberg and asked Wales, "Frank, do you think we might encounter substantial legal risks?" Frank Wales was originally a lawyer. He thought about it and said, "There's no risk in the short term if the group continues to expand its business. After all, we're still far away from the real industry oligarchs like ExxonMobil, General Electric, and AT&T. However, if the company continues to develop in other areas in the next few years, such as the expansion into cable television operators as you mentioned before, we will be subject to very strict anti-monopoly scrutiny. Moreover, the possibility of failure is also very high." Eric had discussed this issue with the management 2 years ago. The decline of North American public television and the rise of cable channels were the inevitable trend of the television industry in the future. In order to maintain a leading position in this trend, in addition to continuing to produce a large amount of premium content, channel resources were also very important. If they did not have their own cable television broadcasting platform at all, Firefly's television business would be easily choked in the future. Although federal law did not prohibit media groups from owning cable television broadcasting platforms, Firefly Group's position was too strong and would definitely encounter anti-monopoly issues. No matter what, this will definitely be a matter of a few years later. Eric sorted out his thoughts and said, "Let's focus on the problem at hand." Frank Wales nodded and said, "Our film and television businesses and other businesses will not encounter legal challenges. However, there may be some trouble in the digital field. A few months ago, when we announced that we would stop cooperating with foreign companies in the digital field, some people instigated the Department of Justice to investigate this. Now, if the topic stirred up by Forbes magazine becomes too hot, some people are likely to bring up the old matter again. So, what we need to do now is to prevent the topic of oligarchs from being used by others. It's best if we can divert the media's attention from the company." Katzenberg looked at Eric and continued, "Eric, I have a suggestion that you might consider." Eric nodded and motioned for Katzenberg to continue. "What I mean is, let the media focus more on you." Eric spread his hands and said, "If this works, of course I don't mind. However, do you think the company will be ignored when it comes to me? So we have to artificially create a focal point. Katzenberg said as he tapped on a copy of Forbes magazine on the table and said, US $98. 7 billion. Compared to the second-ranked Bill Gates, it's 60 billion more. This is difficult for most people to accept. Before Forbes was published, I had seen many articles questioning your net worth. Now we can use this opportunity to create a controversy and divert the media and the public's attention. Frank Wales patted the table and nodded in agreement. Eric, this is a very good idea. Eric thought for a moment and felt that this plan was very feasible. Forbes magazine estimated his net worth to be US $98. 7 billion. This would certainly attract a lot of attention, but at the same time, it would also arouse a lot of doubts. After all, people were not willing to believe in miracles. The three of them discussed the detailed plan, and Eric called Kelly over. After lunch, Katzenberg and Frank went back to continue their work. Eric personally directed the implementation of the established plan. In this day and age, it was impossible to find a large number of fake reviewers to attract Elon. However, Katzenberg's words during the discussion reminded Eric. Before this issue of Forbes magazine was published, many people had questioned Eric's personal wealth. Now that Forbes magazine's data far exceeded that of the major financial media outlets, these people's doubts would definitely be even stronger. What Eric wanted to do was to let these people make their voices heard in the media as much as possible. The efficiency of the assistant's office was very high. Just after 2 in the afternoon, Kelly had gathered a list of 45 people and handed it to Eric. These were all well-known financial media reporters or commentators. Furthermore, they had all recently published articles that questioned Eric's net worth. Kelly looked at Eric, who was flipping through the folder, and explained softly, "We have checked about 300 different newspapers and magazines. This group of people is the most influential among them. If they can make their voices heard in the media in the future, it will definitely be very influential, and more media platforms will follow suit. In addition, we have listed the media platforms under News Corporation, Hearst Corporation, and Condé Nast that are suitable for publishing related articles. However, they will only cooperate if you ask them in person. As for Yahoo, I have already talked to Tina. She will send the relevant article requests to the list we provided in the afternoon." Eric finished reading the general information of these people and opened a contact list on the computer screen on the desktop. He joked to Kelly as he dialed, "If these people know that they are secretly being used as pawns by the people they question and oppose, will they be devastated?" Kelly smiled. Seeing that Eric had already picked up the phone, she did not say anything. On the other side of the desk, Eric held a pencil in his hand and leaned lazily against the back of the chair. He even put his legs up on the table leisurely and said to the enthusiastic voice coming from the phone, "Hey William, it's me, Eric. How have you been?" "Haha, of course. Oh, you're now at St. Simon Castle. I've wanted to visit that place for a long time, but it's a pity that you've never invited me. Maybe not now, I'm too busy, but you can come to Los Angeles." After chatting with the current head of the Hearst Corporation, William III, for a while, Eric only got to the point when the other party took the initiative to ask. He said, "Of course, it's just a small matter. I hope that the few newspapers over at your side can invite a few articles from some people in the next week." Due to the joint shareholding relationship between AE Television Network and ESPN, the Hearst Corporation and Firefly had always been very close. Eric briefly explained a few words, and William Hearst III immediately agreed. As the head of the world's largest paper media group, William Hearst III certainly knew the purpose of Eric's request. After agreeing, he could not help but tease Eric over the phone. After taking down the phone number of a senior executive of the Hearst Corporation given by William Hearst III, Eric pressed the hang-up button and dialed Murdoch's private number. Although greeting Elizabeth would also work, it was more efficient to contact Murdoch directly. After making a few consecutive calls, Eric sat up straight and handed the list in front of him to Kelly. He said, "Here, contact these people. You can talk to them about the specific implementation plan directly. They will cooperate with you." Chapter 838. Strictly speaking, Forbes magazine's estimate of Eric's net worth was $98.7 billion. Eric's current assets mainly included Firefly Group and Firefly Investments. Firefly Group controlled more than 20 subsidiaries in film, TV, theme parks, comics, music, and special effects. Its fixed assets alone had reached $50 billion. In 1996, Firefly's actual annual revenue was $31.3 billion, which was almost 1.5 times the combined revenue of Time Warner and Viacom. The market value of Time Warner and Viacom were $24.3 billion and $28.8 billion respectively. Therefore, Forbes' estimate of $85 billion for Firefly Group was not an exaggeration. Eric held 73.7% of Firefly Group shares, which was worth $62.7 billion. On the other hand, Firefly invested heavily in companies such as Cisco, Nokia, and AOL. Because most of them were listed, it was easier to estimate the value of their assets. According to various public data, Eric's assets were worth about $36 billion. The sum of the two was exactly $98.7 billion given by Forbes magazine. Westerners generally worshipped miracles and individual heroism. But when some miracles far exceeded their knowledge, they would often have doubts. Eric's personal net worth was $98.7 billion. Compared to Bill Gates's $36.4 billion, it was a whole $62.3 billion higher. This kind of disparity in data gave too many people a strong sense of unreality. Therefore, it was almost inevitable that people would question it. In order to resolve the possible antitrust investigation risk caused by Forbes magazine's portrayal of Firefly Group as a media oligarch, Eric used this doubt to cleverly turn the media's topic in the following days to himself. After the latest publication of Forbes magazine, financial reporters and critics who could only publish articles criticizing Eric's personal net worth in low-circulation professional journals, or second- and third-tier newspapers received articles from mainstream North American newspapers and magazines. They wanted to discuss their views on the latest issue of Forbes' rich list. Of course, these media people didn't know that Eric was the one behind this matter. Publishing articles on influential media platforms such as The Washington Post, The New York Post, The Wall Street Journal, and Yahoo Finance was also the best way to expand one's personal influence. So they all rubbed their hands and racked their brains, and a detailed article was quickly published. Some of them also realized that the media platforms that asked them for articles had a close relationship with Firefly Group or Eric himself. However, as media people who at least ostensibly pursued freedom of speech, they certainly would not easily change their opinions. When many people submitted articles that they thought might be contrary to the media platform's expectations, they even made up their minds to argue with the other party to show their strength of character. Unexpectedly, these articles were published without any hindrance. For a time, most media outlets in North America questioned the accuracy of Forbes magazine's data and criticized Eric Williams's personal net worth for being seriously overestimated. US $98.7 billion, a sensationalist number game. The grossly overrated Yahoo! The profit margin of the IT industry is generally low. Firefly Investment Company's US $36 billion valuation is seriously inflated. Net profit of US $1.76 billion. Firefly Group's net interest rate has seriously shrunk. Under the sudden and powerful attack, in order to maintain their credibility, Forbes naturally fought back. For a time, the two sides argued fiercely in print media, television, and even online platforms. Most of the focus of the news was on how much money Eric had. Because the side that opposed Forbes magazine's data was too powerful, in the end, most ordinary people unknowingly accepted the opposition's point of view and treated Forbes magazine's data as a sensationalist joke. Under the repeated bombardment of information, most people generally believed that Eric's actual personal net worth was around US $60 billion. Although it was still much higher than the second place on the list, it was still easier to accept than a figure close to US $100 billion. This was exactly the result that Eric wanted to see. After a week of arguing, the topic naturally began to cool down. However, very few media outlets paid attention to the media oligarchy argument that Forbes magazine threw out. Even if some sensitive media people realized that there were traces of manipulation, it was difficult for them to find any direct evidence. After all, Eric's manipulation this time was very clever. He only allowed people with certain viewpoints to speak more in the media, and then caused the entire media circle to follow suit. There were always too many people in the world who did not know the purpose of their opinions. In the blink of an eye, a new weekend had arrived. A new piece of explosive news swept the media's last bit of interest in the Forbes rich list into a corner, and quickly focused on this matter. This was the new week's box office data of Titanic. A series of miraculous box office data had refreshed many people's understanding of traditional movie box office data. News about Titanic had gone beyond the film and television industry to become a social topic. After another week of reaction, because the Oscars would be held next Monday, fans of Titanic in North America were looking forward to the moment when the film's domestic box office exceeded US $500 million. Therefore, compared to the previous week, the box office of Titanic in North America fell again, reaching US $23 million. The total box office reached US $492 million, only one step away from US $500 million. However, what caught the media's attention was not the shocking box office data in North America, but the overseas box office data. Last week, after a few months of strong publicity, the number of countries and regions where Titanic was released overseas had increased by 17, and the total number of overseas ticket sales had reached 46, including France, Germany, and Japan, the three most important overseas ticket sales countries. Obviously, Titanic had created a series of miracles in North America, whether in terms of box office or award nominations. The audience in these newly released overseas countries had the highest expectations. Therefore, after a new week, the box office of Titanic in 46 countries and regions overseas had reached a jaw-dropping US $179 million. Before this, Titanic had been released in countries and regions overseas. Although the release date was uncertain, the cumulative box office only reached US $400 million after 12 weeks in North America. In just 1 week, with the help of the 17 new countries that opened their box office, the overseas box office of Titanic was close to half of the cumulative box office of the previous 12 weeks in just 1 week. This was definitely a miracle. Among these newly released countries, it was no surprise that the box office performance of France, Germany, and Japan was the most eye-catching. The box office of the first week in France was $28 million, Germany was $26 million, and Japan was an astonishing $49 million. Just these three major box office contributed US $103 million to the total box office of Titanic in 1 week. Although the remaining 43 countries and regions only provided an average of US $1.7 million per box office, the overall box office of US $76 million was still far higher than the average of the previous 12 weeks. Considering that the overseas box office of France, Germany, and Japan may have a similar box office curve as North America, and that there would still be 22 countries releasing in the next period, many box office agencies boldly predicted that Titanic in the next week, with the help of the Oscar awards and the new box office, the overseas box office was likely to exceed the miraculous US $200 million. In this era, 99% of Hollywood films may not necessarily reach US $200 million in the overseas box office, but Titanic may achieve this feat in 1 week. At this time, under the stimulation of the US $179 million overseas box office explosion, the global box office of Titanic had exceeded US $1,071 million. If the overseas box office of Titanic could maintain the scale of US $200 million in a single week in the next few weeks, the global box office of Titanic would reach US $2 billion, which was no longer an unattainable number. With the global box office of US $2 billion, just the box office data alone would bring in a net profit of US $500 million for Firefly Group. Most of the time, the total net profit of the 7 major Hollywood film businesses may not necessarily reach US $500 million, let alone one movie. Moreover, the box office revenue was just the beginning. Because the box office data was too outrageous, although the peripheral income such as the videotapes and soundtracks in the later stages certainly could not be calculated according to the traditional income ratio. It was conceivable that this part of the income would still be a terrifying astronomical figure. During the entire profit cycle of Titanic, through the operation of the entire industrial chain, it was not impossible for Firefly Group to recover a profit of US $2 billion equivalent to the box office number. Originally, most people only expected the global box office of Titanic to be a little more than $1 billion US dollars. At this time, it suddenly jumped to the level of $2 billion US dollars. Stimulated by this terrifying profit, Hollywood studios became even more eager for big production projects. This weekend, Eric could finally rest a little. However, it was impossible for him to completely relax. After all, next Monday was the Academy Awards ceremony. This time, because My Heart Will Go On was nominated for the Best Original Song Oscar, Eric would definitely attend. Speaking of which, it was quite interesting. Since 1988, Eric had produced many movies, but so far he had not won the Best Director award. However, he had been nominated for the Best Screenplay and Best Original Song Oscar, and he had already won the Academy Award for the former. This time, no surprise, he would definitely win another Academy Award. In a living room of the Pointy Corner Villa, Eric stretched out his arms and let the identical twins help him put on his suit. He asked the girl standing next to a Givenchy store customer manager with great interest, "Baby, look, I've already won the Best Original Screenplay award. This time, it shouldn't be too much of a problem to win another Academy Award for Best Original Song Oscar. Then from now on will I continue to win these peripheral awards, such as Best Special Effects, Best Editing, Best Soundtrack, and so on? I'll win all the awards one by one." "Oh, what's that saying? A Grand Slam?" The girl laughed and said, "You definitely won't be able to get a Grand Slam, because you're a man." Okay, Eric also remembered that he would definitely not win the Best Supporting Actress or Best Supporting Actress awards in this lifetime. He continued, "I can win those. You won't be able to win the Best Supporting Actor and Best Actor either." The girl curled her lips. Of course, she knew what Eric was thinking, so she continued to attack him. Everyone chuckled softly. The Natasha sisters buttoned up Eric's black suit and quietly stood next to him. Eric had no interest in trying on clothes. He was more used to buying all kinds of identical clothes and wearing them all the time. However, this time, the girl wanted to walk the red carpet with Eric, so she insisted that he try on a suit that matched his suit. Eric didn't understand why these black suits that looked similar to each other had to be tried on repeatedly. Drew obviously saw Eric's impatience. He walked over and looked him up and down. He whispered a few words to the female Givenchy customer manager with a good figure and said, "Okay, this will be it. Natasha, take off your clothes. The sleeves need to be slightly altered." After tidying up the suit, Drew personally sent the Givenchy customer manager away. Eric left the living room in a relaxed manner. He walked to the sofa by the glass wall and lay down. He stretched his body comfortably and picked up a magazine to read. Drew soon came back. When he saw Eric lying on the sofa, he grinned and leaned over Eric. He said, "Okay, Eric, I'm done trying." Eric threw away the magazine in his hand and hugged the girl's soft waist. He squinted his eyes lazily. The girl blew a few warm breaths in Eric's ear and said, "But there are still shoes. They'll send them over soon." "Pa." There was a crisp sound in the air. It hurts." Drew twisted his body and smiled. "This time it's custom made. You just have to try it on and see if it fits." Eric was satisfied. Chapter 839. Everyone originally expected that the North American box office of Titanic would not exceed US $500 million until the end of the 14th week. But in fact, early in the morning of March 23rd, the news that the North American box office of Titanic had exceeded US $500 million appeared in the major North American newspapers. On Friday and Saturday of the 14th week, Titanic achieved US $5 million and US $6.8 million respectively, pushing the total box office of Titanic to US $504 million in one fell swoop, becoming the first film in North American history to exceed US $500 million at the local box office. Stimulated by this series of news, many media outlets predicted that the ratings of this year's 69th Oscar Awards ceremony would also reach a miraculous number. As for the specific number, many media outlets used a joking tone to express that, just like the box office of Titanic, this number was also unpredictable. Under the watchful eyes of the public, on the afternoon of March 24, the 69th Oscar Awards ceremony was officially held in the Sacred Civic Auditorium in Los Angeles. After a leisurely weekend, Eric did not have any sense of urgency to attend the awards ceremony. In the morning, he received a call from Cameron and brought Drew to Firefly Studios. When he heard that Eric wanted to move all the props of Titanic, including the large ship model, to Firefly Studios and set up a theme exhibition, Cameron was very excited to take over the job, and even got the title of chief engineer. With the help of the dream engineers under Firefly, Cameron quickly drew an open space in the southwest corner of the studio and began the preliminary planning. In order to make more detailed changes to the interior of the Titanic model, Cameron even applied for a US $10 million fund. If it was in the past, the company would definitely not agree to spend US $10 million on such a project. But this time even Katzenberg, who was not on good terms with Cameron, did not hesitate to approve it. Although many people in the group were not optimistic about the Titanic theme exhibition project, in the face of the box office miracle of Titanic, the company did not care about spending another US $10 million. Even if the theme exhibition in the future was not very good, this project would still become a very memorable cultural symbol inside Firefly Studios. The 270-meter-long ship model was almost 4 times the size of the largest studio in the studio. In the eyes of anyone, such a landmark building was very shocking. Eric was with the girl in the morning, listening to Cameron describe his plan in the empty space in the movie theater that had yet to be developed. After the model materials of the Titanic were shipped back from Mexico, Cameron not only wanted to set up a restaurant, exhibition hall, and other spaces inside, but also wanted to restore most of the scenes that appeared in the movie. Obviously, although the production process burned more than US $200 million, many of Cameron's ideas were not presented in the movie. This theme exhibition project became a channel for him to make up for his regrets. In addition to Titanic, Red Alert, which was produced by Catherine, was also nominated for many Oscars. The company was in charge of arranging for the relevant main creators to participate in the awards ceremony. Eric and Camille stayed at Firefly Studios until 5 in the afternoon. Then, Cameron's wife, Linda Hamilton, rushed over from their home in Beverly Hills. Eric took the girl and the Camerons to the Sacred Civic Auditorium in downtown Los Angeles. Sitting in the luxurious limousine, Eric was flipping through a magazine in boredom. Beside him, a girl in a light blue gown stuck her head out of the window and looked ahead. Then she turned around and said, "Eric, did you notice that Jim and Linda almost didn't talk to each other anymore?" Of course, it was impossible for Eric not to notice. In fact, Cameron and Linda Hamilton's relationship had been problematic for a long time. Now they just lacked an opportunity to divorce. However, during the shooting of Titanic, this time, Cameron's fifth wife, Susie Amos, did not participate in the shooting. Eric did not have the bad taste of matchmaking. Therefore, Cameron and Linda Hamilton might make do for a few more years before divorcing. "When did you start to care about this kind of thing?" Eric asked casually without looking up. "I'm just curious," the girl said. Suddenly, she sighed and said with a bit of bitterness, "Why can't a man always like a woman?" Although the girl had always shown a carefree and indifferent attitude towards Eric's flirtatious behavior, which woman could really be completely relieved? Eric could not help but feel a little apologetic. He subconsciously began to make up a story. This is determined by the genetic instinct of males. If you want to get to the bottom of it, you probably have to trace it back to the origin of life 3.8 billion years ago. Noticing Eric's awkward look, the girl giggled. She pulled one of Eric's hands and rubbed it on her tender face. Then she put it to her mouth and gently bit it. She said, "Eric, I know you care about me a lot." Eric said shamelessly, "Although this is the truth, I'm still very pleased that you can see it." "Ha ha, The girl continued to laugh and took the initiative to explain, because you never touch Natasha and the others. Eric held the girl's little hand and squeezed it. He smiled and said, "Actually, I'm afraid that they will hit me." "You know they won't." The two leaned against each other for a moment. The car soon drove into the street where the Sacred Citizen Auditorium was located near the University of Southern California. Under the arrangement of the staff of the Oscar organizers, the car slowly drove to the entrance of the Oscar red carpet after a short pause. It was difficult to reach the $100 million in the North American box office in his previous life. However, because this was an indie film, Julia signed a contract with a salary and share. She only received a low salary of $3 million, and the final cost of the movie was only $25 million. Mira Mike had already made a small profit just from the North American box office alone, not to mention the overseas box office and videotape income in the future. Eric hugged Julia. Seeing that she subconsciously wanted to knock her chin on his shoulder, he quickly pinched her slender waist wrapped in a black dress. Julia woke up and let go of Eric, a little embarrassed. Harvey did not seem to notice Julia's gaffe at all. He shook hands with Eric with a smile and said, "Eric, maybe I should congratulate you in advance." Eric said modestly, "It's still a little too early. Who knows if the Oscar judges will have other thoughts?" No. Harvey shook his head firmly and said, "Maybe there will be some changes in the popular films in the past, but definitely not this time. The Oscar committee will know what to choose." "I hope so." Eric nodded and gestured to the people around him. He said, "Then, I'll see you after the award ceremony. You should be going to the Vanity Fair party, right?" "Yes, about a film next year. I happened to meet a few actors later, and they all came over today." Harvey nodded. He knew that many people were still waiting to greet Eric, so he quickly said, "By the way, Eric, the ratings for Mastow Family are getting better and better. Maybe we should find some time to talk about the next self-produced series." "Of course, I should be free in the next few days." After chatting for a while, Eric brought the girl and turned to the others. Firefly had two films that received a lot of nominations this year, namely Titanic and Red Alert. However, many people knew very well that although there were many outstanding films this year, most of them were just there to accompany the others. Titanic was almost guaranteed to win most of the Oscars. Catherine had already won the Best Director award for Saving Private Ryan. This time, she looked very calm. The woman was wearing a black silk corset dress that made her look even taller. Standing in the crowd, she looked like a crane in a flock of chickens. When Eric walked over, Catherine was talking about something with the screenwriter of Red Alert, Terrence Malick. It seemed to be a new movie. When Eric asked about it, the woman seemed a little indifferent. After a short conversation, Eric dealt with a few more waves of people before walking to the set of Titanic. The girl, who had been quietly hanging by Eric's side, had an inexplicable smile on her face since the beginning. While Eric was temporarily free, she whispered in his ear, "Eric, did you coax her into bed?" Eric asked knowingly. "Who?" The way she looked at me just now was very interesting." Eric tried to recall, but he did not notice anything strange about Catherine just now. He did not even feel that Catherine looked at the girl, so he asked, "Why didn't I feel it?" "Because you're a man. Of course, we women are more sensitive about this kind of thing." The girl smiled and said with certainty, "She's jealous." "How is that possible?" "Don't talk nonsense." Eric interrupted the girl. After the charming and gentle encounter in Australia, Eric only invited Catherine for a few meals at the end of last year. The woman's personality was too strong, and Eric did not want to offend the beauty. There was no substantial progress in the relationship between the two sides. Because he did not get nominated for Best Actor, Shao refused to attend the award ceremony as usual. The crew did not force him, and Eric did not intervene in this matter. In fact, he was happy to see it happen. After all, in the next 20 years without Shao Li and the Oscars, Hollywood would lack a lot of fun. Although Shao Li did not come, the crew of Titanic was still the most conspicuous group of people in the crowd. Everyone exchanged pleasantries and entered the auditorium as the award ceremony approached. At 7 o'clock, in the Sacred Civic Auditorium, Billy Crystal stood on the bow of the Titanic model and slowly appeared on the stage. He even imitated Xiao Li in the movie and shouted a few times. It was very funny. In the warm applause, Billy Crystal walked to the center of the stage, spread his hands, and looked at the auditorium that could accommodate thousands of people. He said, "Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Titanic. We are very big and very expensive. Everyone hopes that we can hurry up. Now let's begin." In the music, Billy Crystal's iconic opening song rang out. Chapter 840. Billy Crystal used a lively song to poke fun at all the nominated films. The award ceremony officially began. Julie Andrews, a veteran Hollywood actress who had starred in Man of Joy and The Sound of Music, was the first to go on stage to present the Oscar honorary award to Hollywood director Michael Kidd. Eric didn't know this veteran director who was over 80 years old, but he remembered the previous honorary award winner, Kirk Douglas, Michael Douglas' father. The second award was for the best costume design for Titanic. Julia stepped onto the podium as the guest presenter and began to introduce the list of nominees. The atmosphere in the auditorium seemed to be much quieter at this moment. Although almost everyone predicted that Titanic would be the biggest winner tonight, the outcome was still uncertain. There were always variables and suspense. The nominated films obviously couldn't be compared to Titanic in terms of costume design. If Titanic didn't get this good start, then the final results of the remaining 13 nominations would be overshadowed. The nominees for Best Costume Design are Sandy Powell for Shakespeare in Love, Paul Brown for The Blue Storm, Ruth Myers for Emma, Alexandra Blaney for Hamlet, and Deborah Scott for Titanic. The gorgeous outfits from the corresponding movies flashed on the big screen one by one. Then Julia opened the envelope in front of her and glanced at the results. However, she didn't immediately approach the microphone. Instead, she subconsciously looked at Eric with a smile on her face, as if she was asking for credit. Eric immediately understood and made a random gesture to Julia before the live camera swept over. Although some people in the audience noticed this brief detail, except for Eric himself, most people only subconsciously took this smile as a congratulatory gesture. After receiving Eric's hint, Julia immediately approached Mike as if nothing had happened and announced, "The Oscar goes to Deborah Scott for Titanic." As expected, the auditorium was immediately filled with warm applause. In the back of the auditorium, a woman in her early 40s stood up excitedly and hugged her husband. Then, she walked to the front row where the creators of Titanic were sitting and shook hands with them one by one. Eric, who was sitting in the middle of the third row, also stood up and reached out to shake hands with Deborah Scott in the aisle. With the Best Costume Design Award, Titanic won 3 technical awards in a row: Best Editing, Best Sound Effects, and Best Visual Effects. In just half an hour, they had already won 4 Oscars. After another award for Best Foreign Language Film, which had nothing to do with Titanic, was presented, the urbane Pierce Brosnan took the stage and introduced Celine Dion to perform Titanic's theme song, "My Heart Will Go On." The heavenly music echoed in the Sacred Citizen Auditorium. Eric thought that the organizers would take the opportunity to award the Best Original Song. Unexpectedly, it was Nicolas Cage who went on stage and introduced the nominees for Best Actress. Among the 5 nominees, there were no nominees who had an overwhelming advantage. In this case, if Titanic hadn't appeared out of nowhere, with Mira Mike's strong public relations ability, Julia might have had a great chance of winning the Best Actress award. However, with the strong performance of Titanic, Mira Mike gave up on the public relations for Shakespeare's Love in order to save money and resources. Julia's chances of winning the Best Actress award plummeted. As for Rachel Weisz, although her performance in the movie was much better than Xiao Li's, for a newcomer like her, an Oscar nomination for Best Actress was already the best reward for her. Her chances of winning the award were much slimmer than Julia's. In the public relations strategy drawn up by Firefly, they didn't spend too much effort on Rachel's nomination. In the end, the Best Actress award fell to Frances McDormand, the lead actress of Frozen Bloodstorm. This Hollywood actress debuted with the Coen brothers' first film, Blood Labyrinth. Many years later, she won the Best Actress Oscar again with the Coen brothers' film. It was also a good story. In the next few awards, Best Art Director and Best Original Screenplay added 2 more Oscars to Titanic. When Cameron walked backstage with the Oscars in hand, amid the warm applause of everyone, Eric raised his hand to look at his watch. The award ceremony had been going on for exactly an hour. It seemed that the organizers had put a lot of thought into the order of the awards for the sake of ratings. Eric couldn't help but guess that the Best Original Song award related to him would be awarded in an hour and a half or two. While Eric was thinking, the next presenter, Courtney Love, began to announce the nominee for Best Makeup on stage. Eric immediately perked up, because this award was crucial to whether Titanic could break the record of 11 Oscars won by Ben-Hur. Out of the 14 nominations for Titanic, other than Rachel, who had little hope of winning the Best Actress nomination, there were 2 other factors that would affect whether the film would be able to break Ben-Hur's record. One was the Best Supporting Actress, and the other was the Best Makeup Artist. Although Titanic had an overwhelming advantage over the other nominees in terms of costume design, it didn't have an obvious advantage in terms of makeup. This was because there was another very important competitor in the same period, which was The Fat Professor, released by Universal Pictures last summer. Eddie Murphy, a black male star with a standard body, played a wonderful role in The Fat Professor, as a fat man who weighed more than 100 pounds through makeup. Only 3 films were nominated for Best Makeup: Titanic, The Fat Professor, and Star Trek: First Contact. After introducing the nominated films, Courtney Love opened the envelope in her hand. Eric couldn't help but shake the girl's little hand next to him. "So the Oscars will belong to..." Courtney Love smiled and paused for a moment to keep the audience in suspense. Then she read out the list of winners: Tina Earnshaw, Gray Cannon, Simon Thompson, and Titanic. Congratulations. The auditorium was filled with applause again. The 3 winning makeup artists walked to the stage one after another. This was already the 7th Oscar winner for Titanic. The guests present were already in a state of numbness. Most of them did not know what this Oscar winner might mean to Titanic. After Eric and the core creators of the film congratulated the 3 makeup artists, they sat down again. Cameron, the 2 producers, John Landau and William Stewart, looked at him. They exchanged excited glances. The 6 Oscars before the Best Makeup Award completely showed that the Oscar jury had compromised for the huge commercial success of Titanic. The biggest suspense of this award ceremony was whether Titanic could break the record of 11 Oscars that Ben-Hur had previously set. When the Best Makeup Award was won, most of the guests present and the audience eagerly waiting for the final result in front of the TV did not understand what this award meant. However, the main creators and the public relations team of Titanic, who had gone through countless deductions during the public relations stage, were very clear about the significance of this award. Winning the Best Makeup Award almost meant that Titanic was likely to win 12 Oscars in the end, creating a new record in the history of the Oscars. Just as Eric had guessed, when the award ceremony was 2 hours old, the veteran Hollywood actress Goldie Hawn went on stage to present the Best Original Song award. At first, Eric had hoped that Cameron, James Horner and himself would sign the award together. After all, he had only written the lyrics and music score. The arrangement and recording of the song had been done by Cameron and James Horner alone. With Eric's current status, he did not care if he won the Oscars alone. However, when the award was submitted, Cameron and James Horner declined to sign the award. The public relations team also felt that if Eric signed the award alone, it would be more beneficial for the public relations and later publicity of the award. Therefore, he was the only one on the final list. Before the award ceremony, Madonna had just gone on stage to perform the song, "You Must Love Me," which was the most threatening song to My Heart Will Go On, from the movie Mrs. Varon. Obviously, the Oscars organizers had deliberately created this segment to create suspense, but the result was not suspenseful. Goldie Hawn quickly opened the envelope and announced the result. The Oscar goes to Eric Williams for My Heart Will Go On. The audience burst into the loudest applause since the beginning of the award ceremony, and some people even cheered. Eric smiled and got up. He hugged the girl next to him and left his seat. He greeted Cameron, John Landau, William Stewart, Rachel, and the others one by one before he stepped onto the stage. Taking the Oscars from Goldie Hawn, Eric hugged the charming first-generation American sweetheart and walked to Mike. As Eric stood in front of the microphone, the applause that had subsided became enthusiastic again. Thank you everyone. Eric politely expressed his gratitude and patiently waited for the applause to stop. Then, he weighed the Oscars in his hand and joked, I think I should make it clear in advance. Actually, I am a director. After a short silence, the guests quickly understood the self-mockery in Eric's words and laughed. Eric was a director, and no one doubted that he was definitely one of the best directors in Hollywood. However, now that he had stood on the Oscar podium twice, the awards that Eric won had nothing to do with the Best Director award. This was a very interesting thing. While giving his acceptance speech, Eric could not help but think of the joke he made with the girl when he was trying on clothes 2 days ago. Would he really win the Oscars? Although Eric certainly did not have much hope for acting awards, and he was not very interested in these awards, other than Best Screenplay, Best Score, and other technical awards such as Best Editing, he was still confident that he could try. After a simple speech, Eric followed Gotti Hawn backstage. Sitting in the auditorium for 2 hours straight was not a good feeling for anyone. Eric was not in a hurry to go back. After ordering the nameplate for the Oscars and accepting a short photo interview, Eric went to the lounge. In the lounge, there were also many guests who were lazy and did not rush to the auditorium. The Oscars had a special seat filler who occupied the original seats when the guests left, so that the empty seats would not appear out of place. Therefore, as long as they did not pay special attention, the audience would not notice that a guest had left halfway. After Eric appeared, everyone eagerly gathered to greet him. After all, Eric was now not just a director. Even if they were familiar with him, they would gain unexpected benefits in the future. Eric had just chatted with Al Pacino when a soft female voice sounded behind him. Hey Eric, congratulations. Eric turned around and saw that Madonna, who had just performed You Must Love Me on stage, had changed into another light gown in such a short time, and was standing behind him with a smile. Eric politely extended his hand to Madonna and said, Thank you, Miss Ciccone. Your performance just now was also very wonderful. Madonna shook Eric's hand, and seemed to be a little dissatisfied. Oh, Eric, you can call me Maggie. Maggie. Eric was a little nervous. This nickname, it would be better to just call Her Majesty Queen. Feeling his palm being gently scratched a few times, Eric suddenly realized that he had been inexplicably distracted. He noticed that Madonna was looking at him with a smile. Slightly embarrassed, he let go of her hand and shrugged. Sorry, Maggie. Whether in his previous life or now, Eric's understanding of Madonna was limited to Auntie, let's put on our clothes properly. Therefore, he did not have any special feelings for this female star. Madonna was obviously interested in him. She pointed to the sofa in the corner of the lounge and said, Eric, how about sitting over there? Eric subconsciously wanted to refuse, but suddenly remembered the Yahoo Music store and nodded in agreement. Madonna was definitely a top singer in the European and American music industry, comparable to Michael Jackson. If Yahoo Music could get the online sales rights of Madonna's music, it would definitely take a big step forward in the development of the online music sales platform. The two sat down on the sofa in the corner. Madonna asked her assistant to pour coffee. Then she looked at Eric with interest again. Seeing that he was empty-handed, she smiled and said, Eric, where's your Oscar? Oh, my assistant put it away for me. Eric pointed to Peter Ritchie, who was standing not far away. Madonna joked, Hee, if I win the award, I'll definitely hold on to the Oscar all night. Eric teased, so every time after the Grammys, you go to bed with a pile of trophies? Madonna charmingly glanced at Eric and said, Do you want to see me in bed with a pile of trophies? Eric immediately shook his head. No. Madonna was stunned and laughed. She said, That's so sad, Eric. Speaking of which, My Heart Will Go On will definitely be the big winner of next year's Grammys. Maybe you will also be invited. Or perhaps, you should have been invited 6 years ago. I still have the single record of New Divide from back then. It's a pity that you don't seem to care much about that. That's your territory. I won't join in the fun, Eric said. He didn't want Madonna to continue the conversation. Just as he was about to take the initiative to mention the Yahoo Music Store, there was a slight commotion at the entrance to the stage. Peter Ritchie hurried over and said, "Mr. Williams, Miss Stewart won the Best Supporting Actress award." Eric stood up in surprise. After winning the Best Makeup award, Eric didn't have much hope for the Best Supporting Actress award. After all, Gloria Stewart was competing for the Best Supporting Actress award with the legendary actress of the golden age of Hollywood, Lauren Bacall. Gloria Stewart couldn't compare to Lauren Bacall in terms of qualifications and fame. Moreover, if Titanic could win 12 Oscars and break the record, everyone would be very satisfied. Unexpectedly, the Best Supporting Actress award, which was about the same as Rachel's Best Actress award, also won. After calming down a little, Eric asked Peter Ritchie, "How many awards has she won?" 10, Peter Ritchie said. He then added, "Now for Titanic, there are only 3 nominations left: Best Score, Best Director, and Best Picture." James Horner was nominated for Best Original Score, Cameron was nominated for Best Director, and finally, Best Picture. At this point, was there still any suspense about these 3 nominations? Without a doubt, this meant that the number of Oscars awarded to Titanic would reach an unprecedented 13. Chapter 841. During the conversation, the 87-year-old Gloria Stewart, who played the role of Rose, slowly walked backstage with the help of the crowd. "Then Maggie, I'll see you at the Vanity Fair party." Now was definitely not the time to talk about the Yahoo Music Store. Eric said goodbye to Madonna and walked towards Gloria Stewart. The old lady had already been helped to sit down on the sofa. Although the award ceremony had been going on for more than 2 hours, Gloria Stewart was still in a very good state of mind. From time to time, she reached out and stroked the golden statuette that was held in the hands of the previous Best Supporting Actor winner, Kevin Spacey. She smiled and murmured, "Incredible, really incredible." As one of the female stars of the Golden Age, Gloria Stewart had faded out of the circle as early as the mid-1940s. Therefore, this was the first time she had been nominated for an Oscar and won an award. Eric walked over and shook the old lady's hand to congratulate her. Everyone chatted for a while. The old lady did not agree to her daughter's suggestion to go back to rest early. Instead, she wanted to witness the final moment. Eric personally helped the old lady back to the auditorium. As soon as they returned to their seats, the previous Best Director winner, Robert Zemeckis, had already stepped onto the stage and began to introduce the nominees for Best Director. Close-up shots of the 5 nominees for Best Director appeared on the big screen one by one. Robert Zemeckis opened the envelope and announced a name that was no longer in doubt. The Oscar will go to James Cameron for Titanic. Amidst the applause and cheers, everyone around the Titanic crew stood up. Eric also stood up and clapped while looking at Cameron, who was hugging everyone in the back row. Because he was sitting in the middle, when he saw Cameron coming over, Eric just reached out and wanted to high-five Cameron to celebrate. Cameron held Eric's hand but did not leave. Instead, he squeezed past William Stewart and Drew, who were sitting around Eric, and forced his way over. Amidst the laughter of the surrounding people, William Stewart and Drew hurriedly moved to the aisle with a smile. Eric endured Cameron's bear hug and patted him on the back. He smiled and said, "Buddy, I know you're very excited. Hurry up and go up. Everyone is waiting for you." "Thank you, Eric, no matter what," Cameron said again. He let go of Eric and shook his fist before continuing to walk to the stage. Eric turned around and saw that the girl had already taken his seat. She pointed at her original seat with a smile and said, "You should sit here. I don't want Jim to step on my dress again. It's very expensive." Eric could only sit down at the side and listen to Cameron's fast-paced speech. He asked William Stewart beside him, "William, you'll definitely be going up on stage later. How do you feel?" The Academy Award for Best Picture could only nominate up to 3 people. The original Spacetime movie Titanic only nominated 2 people, Cameron and John Landau. But this time, as one of the important producers, Firefly put William Stewart's name on the list. Although there were many disagreements during the filming process, Cameron did not object to Firefly's arrangement. "I'm very excited," William Stewart said, then shook his head and smiled. But this experience is enough. It's too difficult to work with Jim. After a pause, William Stewart said tentatively, Eric, I would like to be your producer. On the stage, Cameron once again expressed his gratitude to Eric. The camera swept over and Eric smiled and nodded. When the camera left, he said, That's a good idea. I also hope to have someone familiar with CG special effects to help me. You must have accumulated a lot of experience this time. Jeffrey had been personally responsible for the production of Eric's movies in the early days. After Jeffrey retired, Jerry Bruckheimer took over this position. The two sides also cooperated very happily on Jurassic Park. However, in the past few years, Jerry Bruckheimer had been focusing more and more on his own film and television companies. Although these companies were affiliated with Firefly, he certainly could not be Eric's producer wholeheartedly. After completing Casino Royale, with the Broccoli siblings, Eric needed to find a new producer to help him with the production matters. William Stewart obviously also realized this opportunity. When he heard Eric say this, he immediately said, Then it's settled. Eric could understand William Stewart's eagerness. He smiled and said, Of course it's settled. On the stage, Cameron once again shouted the iconic, I am the king of the world, and left the stage amidst everyone's applause. Then, Al Pacino went on stage to present the Best Picture award. The result was naturally no surprise. Cameron, who hurried back to his seat, got up again and walked to the stage with John Landau and William Stewart. At this point, the 69th Academy Awards ceremony came to a perfect end. Titanic finally won 13 Oscars, creating an unprecedented winning record in the history of the Oscars. It was already early in the morning on the East Coast of the United States, but in Los Angeles on the West Coast, it was just 9 o'clock in the evening when the nightlife began. After the ceremony, most of the guests, regardless of whether they won the award or not, went to parties scattered all over Los Angeles. After a few years of development, Condé Nast Group paid more attention to the brand effect brought by the Vanity Fair party and spent more and more resources to attract the core guests of the Oscars. As a win-win cooperation, more and more superstars and celebrities were inclined to attend the Vanity Fair party after winning the Oscars. Firefly and Condé Nast had already reached a cooperation agreement before the Oscars. They would cancel the individual celebration party and direct all of their crews to the Vanity Fair party. In exchange, Condé Nast Media needed to provide more space for the promotion of Firefly's award-winning film. Therefore, after the award ceremony, the main creators of Titanic and Red Alert rushed to the venue of the Vanity Fair party, the Beverly Hills Art Center. Eric and Drew got out of the car in the parking lot. Peter Ritchie led a team of bodyguards to separate them from the crowd of crazy reporters waiting outside, and escorted them into the art center. As soon as they stepped into the hall, Eric saw a middle-aged man with a bald forehead greet them warmly. Who is this? The girl leaned on Eric and asked in confusion. Peter Ritchie had already followed them and whispered in Eric's ear, Louis Horwitz, the director of this year's awards ceremony. The middle-aged man walked up to them, as if he did not notice Peter Ritchie whispering to Eric. He enthusiastically reached out his hand and said, Eric, congratulations, 13 awards. This is a miracle. Thank you, Mr. Horwitz. Eric reached out and shook hands with him. He said, This year's award ceremony was also very good. Haha, I'm glad you like it. Louis Horwitz's face was glowing as he greeted Eric politely. Louis Horwitz did not leave until the two of them entered the party hall. The girl watched him leave and said, What an interesting guy. He's so excited, as if he also won an award. He definitely won an award, Eric said with a smile. He turned and asked Peter Ritchie behind him, The ratings for this award ceremony should be out, right? Yes, Mr. Williams. Peter Ritchie said, According to the preliminary statistics from ABC, the average number of viewers was 51 million, which is 12 million more than last year. The highest number of viewers was in the last 10 minutes, 55. 5 million. Based on these figures, the price of a 30-second Oscar commercial will be around $950,000, which is 30% higher than last year's. As the director, Mr. Louis Horwitz should be able to get a certain bonus and commission. After Eric heard that, he smiled and said, See, he did win an award. The girl laughed and said, haha, it's definitely not as valuable as the awards we won. Saying that, Eric remembered something and asked Peter Ritchie, Madonna should be coming, right? Peter Ritchie said, Miss Ciccone should be on the invitation list. Do you need me to ask her? Eric nodded and said, if you're sure she'll be coming, call someone to send over a few Fireflyer samples. I'll be using them later. Okay, Peter Ritchie said. Seeing that Eric did not have any other orders, he hurriedly turned around and left. The girl turned her head and looked at Peter Ritchie's back as he left. She smiled and said, he's a very capable guy, Eric. If that's the case, why did you let him work at FFM? Eric took 2 glasses of wine from the waiter and handed one to the girl. He explained, just like Alan, these people should be considered our direct subordinates. Eric originally arranged for his first assistant, Alan Fissman, to be a department manager at ABC. After a few years of training, he had been promoted to the position of vice president of ABC. It was Alan's success that inspired Eric. He decided to continuously select the elites from his assistant office and familiarize them with them for a period of time. Then, based on their individual abilities, he would arrange for them to work in the major companies in the Firefly system to create a direct management team. Of course, Eric would not give these people special treatment. Unless they could prove their strength, they would still face the fate of being eliminated. The girl just nodded as if she understood. The guests in the party hall came up to greet them. She put aside this thought and enthusiastically socialized with Eric in the crowd. As more and more people arrived at the party, the hall became more and more lively. The Titanic crew, who gathered almost all the glory tonight, was undoubtedly the most dazzling group of people. Long after the party began, everyone spent a long time in a series of congratulations and compliments. After about an hour, Eric left alone. Madonna had just arrived at the party and came over to say hello. Eric took a few Fireflyer players from Peter Ritchie, who was waiting on the sidelines, and walked over to Madonna, who was chatting with someone in a booth. Sitting opposite Madonna was a Hollywood male star that Eric was not familiar with. He looked to be in his mid-20s and seemed to have appeared in a popular teen horror film in recent years. Eric could not call out the other party's name for a while, so he just said, "Hey, can I talk to Maggie alone?" Although the young man was a little carried away by the Queen, when he saw Eric, he immediately woke up and misunderstood something. He humbly said with a little panic, "Of course, Mr. Williams, I'll leave now." Madonna looked at the young man who was about to be in her mouth disappear in a puff of smoke, and curled her lips. When she saw Eric sitting opposite her, she immediately became interested and began to tease him. "Eric, I was just about to start a new romance, but now you've ruined it. How are you going to compensate me?" Eric had no intention of taking the bait. He had no interest in this cold and unrestrained queen of the music industry. He just casually took out a Fireflyer from his pocket and handed it over, saying, "Here, I'll compensate you with this." Madonna picked up the sky blue Fireflyer and looked at it. Suddenly she laughed and said, "I've seen it before, and my agent told me that this kind of small thing may seriously hurt the sales of physical records." Madonna glanced at Eric with interest. There was a hint of understanding and ridicule in her eyes, as if she wanted to see how Eric would answer. In the 70s, when Sony first introduced the video recorder, Hollywood also had a similar view as you are now. Universal Pictures and Disney fought a 10-year lawsuit with Sony over this. Eric did not mind the implied rejection in Madonna's words and said, "But today, 20 years later, the annual video sales of Hollywood movies have exceeded $13 billion, more than twice the local box office data of Hollywood. It was the rise of the videotape industry that created the prosperity of Hollywood today. Without the additional profits brought by the videotape industry, no company in Hollywood would dare to make an investment-grade film like Titanic." With that said, Eric took out another white Fireflyer from his pocket again and said, "And what you see now is the future of the recording industry." "It's very interesting." Madonna played with the player in her hand and said, "Eric, I'm not so easy to persuade. I didn't intend to persuade you tonight. I'm just creating an opportunity for everyone." "Oh, what opportunity?" "Of course, an opportunity for cooperation." Chapter 842. Judging from Madonna's absent-minded expression, Eric's words obviously didn't move her at all. However, Madonna didn't want to appear too strong in front of Eric. She picked up the champagne in front of her and took a few sips. She glanced at Eric out of habit and said with a smile, "Eric, I've never thought of myself as a smart person, so I'm very good at listening to the opinions of my team. Although what you said just now is very reasonable, I still believe what my agent said some time ago. This little thing is called Firefly, right? It's a very nice name. However, if this product becomes popular, it will definitely affect the sales of physical records. Record sales are the foundation of our survival. Moreover, my agent also told me that the piracy of music on the internet is very serious, so I plan to stay away from this new field. Even if, as you just said, this little thing will reach the height of the video recorder industry in 20 years, I'll definitely be retired by then." Speaking of piracy, Eric was not discouraged by Madonna's straightforward rejection, and continued, "Maggie, do you know what the internet is like to the music industry now?" In fact, the video recorder example that Eric had just mentioned had already made Madonna's mind waver. The long speech just now was more like a way for her to strengthen her confidence. Madonna had realized that the young man in front of her seemed to be very good at persuading her, but she was very resistant to this feeling. At least, she didn't want to be persuaded on such an occasion tonight. So she even had the idea of getting up and walking away. However, Eric's clever guidance made her curious, and she asked, "What is it?" Eric gently gestured, and his magnetic voice had a hint of bewitchment. He said, "For the music industry, the internet world with more than 100 million users in the world is like a black room, a huge and vast black room." Madonna didn't speak. She tilted her head slightly and continued to listen. Eric didn't stop and continued, "In this empty and dark black room, countless people look forward to the light. They also have enough ability to pay a sufficient price to get the light, but the light treats this space as the land of original sin and refuses to come. When the light abandons them, in order to get the light, people can only steal the fire. This is piracy. The current situation of the internet music industry is like this. It gathers a huge group of people with the strongest spending power in the world. This is beyond doubt. However, the record companies refuse to recognize this huge potential market because of various scruples. They think that by doing so, they can resist the impact of the internet on the physical record industry, but in fact, the result is just the opposite. The boycott of the record industry not only can't stop the strong demand for music, but it will also, in turn, make the internet music piracy more rampant. What's more, the lack of a genuine music sales platform will cause users to become more and more accustomed to free pirated music. The power of habit is very scary. When everyone is used to downloading hundreds and thousands of free songs from the internet at any time and place, do you think they will still be willing to pay for a physical album that costs $20? Madonna raised the corner of her eyes and retorted, "Eric, your assumption is not valid at all. No one dares to spread pirated music on the internet so unscrupulously. People who do so will not only be sued to bankruptcy, but also be sentenced to 1,000 years by federal law." Eric smiled and said, "Maggie, you don't understand the internet, so it's not wrong to think so. But what you don't know is that even if someone is not familiar with the internet technology, they can buy the template structure of a music website with just a few dozen dollars. Similarly, with some money, they can even rent a server in any country in the world without spending any money. Then, they can build a pirated music website that stores tens of thousands of songs. It's easy for these websites to be anonymous, and you can't trace the person responsible at all. Moreover, because of the huge demand for music by internet users, even if 10,000 pirated music websites are shut down for legal reasons every day, thousands of new pirated music websites will appear almost at the same time." Madonna was finally a little moved. Eric didn't stop there. He continued, "Therefore, the most effective way to combat piracy is to establish a legitimate online music sales platform, so that all users have a legal channel to obtain legitimate music. Moreover, from the beginning of this industry's development, the public's habit of buying legitimate music should be cultivated. As I said just now, if there is light in a dark room, Although it can't illuminate all the dark corners, at least a large number of people don't need to steal Tinder, and no one will take stealing Tinder for granted. So Maggie, what do you think? Madonna paused for a moment before coming back to her senses. With undisguised interest in her eyes, she looked at Eric and said, "After listening to you, I suddenly feel that it would be better if the internet didn't exist." Eric spread out his hands and said with a smile, "Actually, I also feel that if this society could suddenly go back to 10,000 years ago, it would be wonderful." Madonna thought that Eric was laughing at her point of view just now. She curled her lips and said, "Do you really think so?" "Of course." Eric nodded with certainty. He looked across the glass and looked up and down at Madonna, who was wearing a black low-cut dress, and said with a fascinated look, "According to the standards of 10,000 years ago, people should still be naked." Madonna was stunned, and then she laughed with joy. After a moment, she leaned forward slightly, almost lying on the glass, and looked at Eric and said, "Eric, do you want to see what I looked like 10,000 years ago? Why don't we go find a room now?" Eric really wanted to slap himself. He dug a hole for himself. After 2 dry coughs, Eric recovered and said, "Maggie, let's talk about music. Even if you can't sell your new album on online platforms for the time being, I think you can still give the music released in the past a try. These albums that were released in the past definitely can't sell many physical records now, but I believe that if you put them on online platforms, they can still bring you a very considerable income every year." Madonna was not angry because Eric avoided the topic just now. She leaned back on the sofa and said, "But, Eric, I personally don't have the distribution rights of most of my music, so you should talk to Warner." No, I still believe that you have enough distribution rights in this matter." Eric shook his head and said, although Madonna's status in the music industry was not as high as Michael Jackson's, the way she cooperated with Warner Records was the same as Jackson's. The two sides jointly established a music subsidiary responsible for the production and distribution of her own music. This also meant that Madonna had a lot of autonomy in the distribution of her own music. What's more, the internet digital music distribution right now was almost a new concept. With Madonna's status in the music industry, she could totally renegotiate the relevant supplementary contract with Time Warner. It was precisely because of this that Eric spent so much effort tonight. If it was a second or third-tier singer who was completely controlled by the record company, Eric would not waste his breath at all. Madonna saw that Eric saw through her excuse, but she was not embarrassed. She said, "But Eric, if I do this, what benefits can I get?" "Oh, this." Eric smiled and said, "Yahoo's online music store uses a 30-70 split. The platform gets 30%, the copyright owner gets 70%. If you have full digital distribution rights of your own music, I think you don't need to split it with Time Warner. At least, you don't need to give them too much, right?" Madonna's eyes lit up. At the same time, she also keenly caught a new term in Eric's words. "Digital distribution rights?" Eric nodded and said, "This should be a new concept. It refers to music distribution that is not related to cassettes, CDs, films, and other physical media. Currently, it refers to the internet music distribution. I think in the contract you signed with Time Warner, there should not be any clauses in this area, right?" Madonna nodded subconsciously. So Eric immediately tempted again. "I think next, you should renegotiate the supplementary contract with Time Warner as soon as possible to determine the ownership of the digital distribution rights." Madonna blinked a few times, then suddenly laughed and said, "Eric, this is your ultimate goal tonight. If I take back the digital distribution rights of my own music from Time Warner, it will definitely cause the A-list singers of the major record companies to follow suit. Yahoo didn't manage to get the digital distribution rights from the 5 major record companies, but if these rights are distributed to the singers themselves, you can take them down one by one." "I have to say, Maggie, you are actually very smart," Eric praised and said, "but you have definitely wronged me. Do I look like a scheming person to you?" Madonna really looked at Eric again and said firmly, "Yes." "Okay, I'm hurt." Eric clutched his chest and handed the fireflyer that he had just placed beside him to Madonna. He said, "These 2 little things are for you. Someone will pass the rest of the accessories to your assistant. Also, this is my business card. If you have any decisions, you can call me at any time. Seeing Eric hand over his business card, and was about to get up and leave, Madonna hurriedly stopped him. Hey Eric, you have made so many requests to me. Shouldn't you compensate me with something? Maggie, I am actually a very conservative person. Madonna rolled her eyes at him. She had flirted with Eric so many times, but he was indifferent. Of course, she would not ask for a rebuff. She said, I am now preparing my own new album. How about you write a few songs for me? Over the years, although the number of songs Eric produced was very small, almost every one of them had reached a level that could be called amazing. A few hours ago, when Madonna took the initiative to greet him backstage at the Oscars, she actually had this thought in mind. To be honest, her career had begun to decline over the years. If Eric could help her write a few songs that matched the quality of his previous works, it would definitely help her make a comeback even if she did not use Eric's personal fame. Eric was really looking forward to Madonna agreeing to enter the Yahoo Music store. He did not want to reject her outright. He thought for a while and said, "Get someone to send me a copy of the style of your new album. It would be best if there were a few sample songs. I will try it out. Of course, I can't guarantee it. It needs inspiration. I will get someone to send it to you tomorrow." Madonna nodded quickly. She thought for a while and added, "I will also get someone to negotiate with Warner about the digital distribution rights as soon as possible. In fact, I also have some hopes of working with you. Then, I hope we won't disappoint each other." Eric reached out his hand. Madonna shook his hand and nodded. "I look forward to working with you." Chapter 843. On the night of the 69th Academy Awards ceremony, in addition to more than 50 million viewers in North America, who watched the ceremony directly through ABC TV, according to subsequent statistics, worldwide, the number of viewers who followed the results of the Titanic Awards through overseas TV stations, online news broadcasts, and various other means exceeded an astonishing 1 billion people. Therefore, the news that Titanic won 13 awards at the 69th Academy Awards ceremony and broke the all-time Oscar-winning record quickly spread to every corner of the world almost as soon as the results were released that night. In this world where the winner was king, regardless of whether the result was controversial or not, the fact that Titanic had created an Oscar legend was a foregone conclusion. Stimulated by the news of Titanic's overwhelming victory at the Academy Awards ceremony, the box office figures of Titanic, in North America and even in the world during the week of March 21st to March 27th were all red. In North America, the box office of Titanic, in the 14th week rebounded again compared to the 13th week, earning $25.1 million. The cumulative box office in North America reached $517 million, continuing to break the box office record set by itself. The performance of the overseas box office was even more impressive. This week, the number of overseas tickets for Titanic once again increased significantly to 68. At the same time, stimulated by the news that Titanic had created an Oscar-winning record, the box office figures in many countries where the film was released in the early weeks showed a significant rebound. The box office figures in the overseas tickets released in the last 2 weeks were even more impressive. After preliminary statistics, the overseas box office of Titanic in the latest week reached $236 million, very well fulfilling the media's prediction that the overseas box office of Titanic would exceed $200 million this week. At the same time, the global box office of Titanic also reached an astonishing $332 million, directly raising the global box office record from $1 billion to $1.3 billion. Moreover, no one could predict what the ultimate figure would be. Easter 1997 was on March 30th, which meant that most of the Western countries would welcome the Easter holiday in the next week. Although the length of the Easter holiday varied in different countries, there was no doubt that this popular period would once again boost the global box office of Titanic. Even if the North American box office would show a significant decline after the Oscars, The strong overseas box office was likely to push the global box office of Titanic to $1.5 billion in the next week. While Titanic continued to attract the attention of hundreds of millions of people, after more than a month of intensive publicity, the date of Firefly Electronics' release of the world's first MP3 player, the Fireflyer, on April 2 was approaching. Although it was a completely new music player product, under the publicity of Firefly Electronics' free distribution of 10,000 Firefly units, this MP3 player had already generated a strong response across the United States. After the Fireflyer trial lottery ended, users who still wanted to buy this player posted on the newly established trading platform on the internet. Some people even raised the price of a Fireflyer to $12 million. Traditional music player manufacturers naturally saw the strong threat of the Fireflyer player to Walkman, CD player, and other players. While they obtained Fireflyer prototypes through various channels for disassembly and research, under the instructions of some traditional manufacturers, many media outlets began to publicize the threat of Fireflyer, a device that could easily spread pirated music, to the recording industry. They even called on the Recording Industry Association of America to sue Firefly Electronics and directly ban the production and sales of MP3 players. In this case, after the Oscar ceremony, the American pop queen Madonna Ciccone opened negotiations with Warner Records for the digital distribution rights of her personal records, which instantly attracted the attention of countless media outlets. Subsequently, the news of Madonna's contact with Eric at the Vanity Fair party quickly spread. This also made Warner Records understand the intention of Madonna and Eric, who was hiding behind her behind the scenes. Before this, Yahoo Music did not get the online music sales rights from any of the 5 major record companies. Therefore, the major record companies also had a hunch that if Madonna succeeded, many of their A-list singers would make similar requests. At that time, Yahoo could adopt a strategy of breaking down these singers who held the digital distribution rights alone, and the record companies would be in an extremely passive situation. Warner Records immediately rejected Madonna's application for the negotiation of digital distribution rights. Roger Ames, the president of Warner Records, said at a press conference that in order to stop digital music sales, which could easily spread piracy, Warner Records would stop some singers from seeking digital distribution rights at all costs. Digital distribution rights of music should not exist. However, although Warner Records' attitude was very tough on the surface, the private situation was far from so. In 1992, Madonna's career was at its peak. Therefore, although the Cowboy Records company she established was still affiliated with Warner Records, she had a lot of independent control, and also held the distribution rights of all of Madonna's records in the past few years. In other words, even if Warner Records did not agree or even recognize the concept of digital distribution rights, with Madonna's control over Cowboy, this company could still authorize Yahoo Music to sell the records released by Madonna in recent years. The reason why Madonna opened the negotiations with Warner Records was to get back the digital distribution rights of many of her records from the beginning of her debut to 1992. Because the copyright of these records did not belong to Cowboy Records, but was still in the hands of Warner Records. Warner Records' firm and rude attitude also aroused the rebellious mentality of the stubborn and fiery singer. On the day Warner Records president Roger Ames made a statement, Madonna publicly said that she would cooperate with Yahoo Music to sell the 3 albums held by Cowboy Records online, and at the same time, she claimed that she would sue Warner Records for the digital distribution rights. If it was an ordinary singer, Time Warner may be able to threaten them with cold storage, and so on to make them retreat. But at Madonna's level, because the two sides were almost in a position of equal cooperation, the relevant contract could not bind Madonna. Therefore, these tricks used to deal with ordinary singers were difficult to work on her. The senior executives of Warner Records could only take turns to play the good cop and the bad cop, trying to make Madonna give up the idea of cooperating with Yahoo Music. Of course, Firefly Electronics and Yahoo would not be indifferent. Under Eric's instructions, Firefly Electronics and Yahoo were also very active in offering various favorable conditions to Madonna. While keeping a close eye on the music industry, after the Oscars, Eric's work was busy again. Although there were still 2 months before the summer vacation, the promotional work for the summer movies had already been fully launched. This year's summer vacation was destined to not be peaceful. In addition to a series of high-profile live-action blockbusters such as James Bond, Casino Royale and Jedi Cop 2, there would be 3 animated movies released at the same time this summer, namely Finding Nemo produced by Pixar, Ice Age produced by Blue Sky Studios, and The Lion King 2 produced by Paramount Animation. Obviously, these 3 animated movies were very closely related to Firefly Group. Moreover, as the first sequel to The Lion King that created a global box office miracle of $900 million, The Lion King 2 was undoubtedly the strongest of the 3 movies. When the schedules of the 3 animated movies were announced one after another, Viacom's chairman, Sam Redstone, even confidently announced that The Lion King 2 would beat Finding Nemo and Ice Age. Chapter 844. Easter had just passed. Because he was too busy, Eric did not return to New York to spend Easter with the children. However, he promised the women that he would return to East Hampton before April 10th. The 2 little guys would be 4 years old soon. In a restaurant in Firefly Studios, on a new Monday, Eric and Katzenberg were having breakfast together and discussing the recent 3 animated films released during the summer. The Lion King 2 was released at the same time as Paramount's Stranger in the Wind last year. Although 3 years have passed, the influence of The Lion King is still there. Roger Ailes spent 3 years crafting this movie, and the quality of the animation should not be much worse than the first one. The only thing we can do is to create obstacles for Paramount in terms of publicity. Katzenberg introduced the recent situation, took a sip of juice and continued. I have spoken to Mr. Murdoch several times on the phone. In the next 2 months of publicity, there will be no trailers or advertisements for Lion King 2 on all television platforms such as Firefly's ABC television network and Disney Channel. The audience will only see information about Finding Nemo and Ice Age. On the News Corporation's side, Fox Network, Fox Family Channel, and other platforms will do the same. We will also try our best to compete for the trailers and advertisements on NBC and CBS. According to the publicity department's estimates, when all these deployments are implemented, the publicity budget invested by Paramount will only reach half of the usual effect. Business competition was never tender. During the promotion of Titanic, at the end of last year, Viacom's MTV television station, which targeted the youth audience, refused to release a trailer for Titanic on the grounds that there was a shortage of advertising slots. As the method of comprehensive distribution became more and more common, the importance of film publicity to box office became more and more obvious. This could be seen from the increasing proportion of film publicity budgets in the total investment cost. This time, whether it was a counterattack to Viacom's behavior a few months ago, or a complete ban on The Lion King 2 in the Firefly system out of competition, it was very necessary. Viacom's best TV asset at this time was only MTV. As for the Disney Channel, the number of users was not on the same order of magnitude as the Disney Channel. As the internet had only just emerged in recent years, the current mainstream methods of movie promotion were still TV trailers, print media advertisements, and posters in a large number of public advertising spaces. Among them, the role of TV trailers was undoubtedly the most important, especially for animated movies. After all, a large proportion of animated movie audiences were teenagers and children who did not read newspapers or magazines. The joint ban by ABC and Fox meant that The Lion King 2 would lose at least half of the television advertising platforms in North America. Viacom's own television resources were quite limited, and there was also competition from Firefly and Fox to obtain advertising slots on external platforms such as CBS and NBC. Paramount Pictures would definitely have to pay a higher price for the promotion of The Lion King 2, and the final marketing result would be far inferior to Finding Nemo and Finding Nemo. Eric had already finished the breakfast in front of him and was slowly drinking a cup of hot milk. After listening to Katzenberg, he asked, "Have you considered that Viacom might provoke the ban of The Lion King 2 in the media?" Of course, the way to deal with it is very simple. Unless necessary, we will ignore it as much as possible. This can also prevent Paramount from using this topic to create hype. This matter had been discussed in last week's meeting. If Viacom made similar statements in the media, none of Firefly's departments would make a public response. Also, we are not doing anything against the rules. If anyone questions, we can provide enough evidence to prove that all the advertising slots in our TV station have been sold out. Katzenberg spread out his hands and smiled with his Totoro teeth. He also made a very vivid analogy. If there is no opponent, a person who punches the air will only make people feel funny. Eric also laughed and said, I guess after this incident, Lei Sherdong will definitely make up his mind to attack CBS or NBC again. General Electric will not sell NBC at all in the next few years. As for CBS, according to its current market value, Viacom may have to spend more than $30 billion to buy it. With the market share of public TV networks being eroded by cable TV, even if the price was reduced by half, I don't think it's worth it. When we bought Metropolis/ABC, if it weren't for the shares of ESPN and AE Network, it would have been a bad deal, Eric said. But Lei Sherdong definitely doesn't think so. His mindset is still 20 years ago, when the public TV network was at its peak. In his memory, Viacom had spent a whopping $46 billion to acquire the CBS network. However, after the deal was completed, CBS began to suffer losses due to the impact of the cable television industry. Many years later, in order to avoid being dragged down by the CBS network, Viacom had to separate CBS and its profitable cable TV business from MTV. Lei Sherdong was a very aggressive person, there was no doubt about that. However, perhaps due to the limitations of the era, his vision was always poor. Although Viacom's development was getting bigger and bigger in the consolidation of media groups, it turned out that whether it was the acquisition of the Blockbuster video store chain or the acquisition of the CBS network, it was an extremely failed business. After the new century, Viacom gradually fell from a first-tier media giant to a second-tier media group. The two of them then talked about the distribution of other films during the summer. In the end, Katzenberg hesitated for a moment before saying, Eric, Barry Weiss and I talked about the recent digital music distribution rights. He felt very uneasy. I also think that your digital distribution strategy for Firefly Records is too radical. Barry Weiss was a senior official that Firefly had poached from Jive Music, a company under Sony Music. He was currently the president of Firefly Records. In the past 2 years, the Backstreet Boys team that Barry Weiss had personally built had quickly become a first-tier pop singer. Last year, they created the first album to sell more than 20 million albums worldwide. In addition to the Backstreet Boys, the other singers under Firefly Records relied on the rich media resources of Firefly Group, and their development was quite stable. Christina, Britney, Justin Timberlake, and other former members of MMC, after several years of training, had released singles one after another last year and received good feedback from the market. Firefly Records had already launched a plan to tailor an album for them. Eric was very satisfied with the success of Barry Weiss' work in the past 2 years. At this time, after hearing Katzenberg's retelling, Eric was not surprised. He just said, Jeffrey, you should have seen the digital distribution plan I gave to Firefly Records, right? Katzenberg nodded and said, It feels very similar to the phased release of a movie. The physical album release cycle is 3 months. After 3 months, the digital album will be released on the Yahoo Music Store. Although the 3-month window is a little short, it is still acceptable. But then 6 months after the album is released, it will be split into singles for separate sales. Barry said that this will have the biggest impact on record sales. For many albums, unless they were hardcore music fans, most people tended to only like 1 or 2 of the best songs. In fact, this was also deliberately done by the record company in order to save resources and maximize profits. It was definitely much easier to make a mediocre song than a classic song, and they could also spend less money and energy. If the album was split, it would directly lead to a large number of mediocre songs that no one cared about, which would definitely threaten the survival of the record company that had been formed for many years. Jeffrey, let's not talk about the pros and cons of this plan for the time being, Eric said. He took out a Fireflyer from his pocket and said, You must know this player very well, so let's make a hypothesis. If this player was completely developed by your personal company, and you have no interest in the record industry, then in order to promote this machine as much as possible, what would you do? Katzenberg also realized that the Fireflyer had the possibility of replacing the traditional portable music player market. In the current portable music player market, Sony's Walkman still occupied the mainstream, with annual sales of about 15 million units. The sales figures of other CD players, MD Walkman, and other devices were probably in the same order of magnitude. In other words, the annual market capacity of portable music players was about 30 million units. If they could completely occupy this market, according to the usual net profit rate of about 15% for electronic devices, the net profit of the Fireflyer, which was priced at $299, would be about $45. The annual sales of 30 million units would bring in a net profit of $1.35 billion. This figure was enough to squeeze into the top 100 of the global corporate profitability list. Katzenberg was also not a person with a strong sense of morality. Considering the terrifying business opportunities contained in this player, he would naturally choose the most favorable promotion and sales method for himself at all costs. He would even secretly condone the spread of online pirated music. As for the life and death of the record company, it had nothing to do with him. According to this train of thought, if he was put in charge of Firefly Electronics, he would not hesitate to completely abandon Firefly Records. Firefly Records had been doing well in recent years, but the annual profit it provided for the group was less than $100 million. Even if it developed to the scale of the 5 major record companies, it still could not compare to the profits that Fireflyer could possibly generate. After all, the output of the music industry was far from comparable to the movie industry. None of the 5 major record companies in the world had annual profits of more than $1 billion. After working together for so long, Eric knew Katzenberg's character like the back of his hand. After seeing his brief pondering expression, Eric could roughly guess what he was thinking. He said, "There is no shortage of smart people in the world." The MP3 audio format was initially introduced 5 years ago. During these 5 years, I can confidently guess that traditional music equipment manufacturers must have had ideas similar to the Fireflyer player. However, in order to protect their own player products and the huge vested interests of the CD, cassette, and other peripheral industries, they will definitely instinctively stop this kind of project. But this result is not the worst. Just like what I just hypothesized, if similar player products are produced by electronic manufacturers that have nothing to do with the recording industry, in order to gain more profits, they will definitely ignore the interests of the record companies as much as possible. Not to mention, I'm trying my best to pull the record companies in. They only need a high-sounding excuse. For example, our player can only copy music from genuine CDs, then they can mass-produce and promote this product. As for where users get the music from, do you think they will care? What about you? Katzenberg suddenly asked. Eric, do you care? Eric smiled and leaned back in his chair. He said honestly, "No, I don't care." Katzenberg said, "Then why are you doing this?" Eric thought for a bit and said, "Because I want to take the initiative. Or, to put it bluntly, I just want to be the one who makes the rules. I don't want to be stuck in a rut and wait for others to make the rules, or even be eliminated." So, Jeffrey, if you pay more attention to Yahoo, you should find that Yahoo has further developed the MP4 video format on the basis of the MP3 audio format. If the IT industry develops according to Moore's law, in less than 10 years, Hollywood will face a situation similar to the recording industry. At that time, if you want to survive, the easiest way is to become the one who makes the rules, instead of blaming others or blindly resisting emerging technologies. Katzenberg had always admired his young boss's excellent vision in the film and television industry and investment, but he always felt that Eric's character lacked the controlling desire that a leader should have. He was even too gentle in many aspects and lacked aggression. But now, in this small restaurant in Firefly Studios, Katzenberg suddenly realized that Eric's plan was many times broader than his. Not only did he own the present, but he even planned to control the future. Katzenberg even realized that maybe he was just a chess piece in Eric's ambitious plan for the future. A chess piece could not see the entire layout of the chessboard. It could only observe everything within its own fixed route and point at the chess player's moves. Am I willing to be a chess piece? Katzenberg couldn't help but ask himself, but he quickly gave an answer in his heart. Why not? How many people in the world dared to say that they were not chess pieces? But there were too many people who might not even have the opportunity to come into contact with a chess player in their entire life. Now, not only did he have such an opportunity, but he could even consciously create the future with a chess player. This was much luckier than those who lived their lives without knowing what to do. Eric, I have a good relationship with Geffen. Maybe I can call him and invite him to the Fireflyer conference in San Francisco on April 2nd. What do you think? David Geffen's record company used to be a very important subsidiary of Warner Music Group. The music copyright it owned was almost the same as Firefly Records. Katzenberg and David Geffen had always been very good friends. When David Geffen had just left Time Warner, Katzenberg had even suggested that Eric buy David Geffen's record company, but Eric had not agreed. Eric did not know what had happened to Katzenberg's mental state in such a short time. But since he was willing to take the initiative to bridge the gap, Eric naturally would not refuse. Of course, if he's willing, well, we can all get together then. After breakfast, they chatted for a while. Katzenberg then rushed to the Burbank headquarters to attend the weekly meeting, so the two parted ways. Eric's work schedule was also very busy today. In the morning, he had to check the rough cut of Jurassic Park 3 and discuss the post-production special effects with director Joe Johnston and the Digital Domain's post-production team. At noon, he had an appointment with Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay for lunch to discuss the disaster film, The Day After Tomorrow project. After all, this project could not be dragged on like this. Eric did not plan to direct it personally, and the company could not wait forever. Coincidentally, after Michael Bay finished Jedi Cop 2, he did not want to film Jedi Cop 3 anymore. Instead, he wanted to try the special effects theme. Jerry Bruckheimer proposed to let Michael Bay direct The Day After Tomorrow. In the afternoon, he still had to rush to the Fox set to attend the final round of auditions for the female lead of Doomsday Angel. Eric was not interested in admiring or even hunting beauties through the auditions. He did not need to go through such a complicated process to get any woman he wanted. However, since he took the initiative to take on this task, he had to show his face symbolically. Because the box office performance of Jurassic Park 2 was almost the same as the first movie, although the option contract was signed in advance, Joe Johnston still proposed to get more money from Jurassic Park 3. The two sides spent 3 months negotiating before reaching an agreement. The script writing and team formation for the third movie were not as smooth as the second movie. Therefore, the planned 2-year production period was extended to 2.5 years. Jurassic Park 3 could only miss the summer and was scheduled for the Christmas season at the end of the year. Jurassic Park 3 had just finished filming on the eve of the Oscars. Jerry Bruckheimer was still the producer. The original appointment was at noon, but in order to understand the special effects production process, Michael Bay came to Firefly Studios with Jerry Bruckheimer in the morning to listen in on the post-production plan for Jurassic Park 3. No one's success was a fluke. Eric was very satisfied with Michael Bay's attitude. After finishing the morning's work, he had already let go of his hesitation and decided to hand over the production of The Day After Tomorrow to him. At noon, everyone directly discussed the production plan of The Day After Tomorrow in the restaurant. Chapter 8:45. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Eric arrived at the Fox set in Century City on time. As soon as he got out of the car, he saw Elizabeth walking over in high heels, followed by an assistant holding a document. Eric hugged Elizabeth and walked out of the parking lot together. He did not forget to ask, "Why are you here?" Elizabeth rolled her eyes and said, "This is my house, why can't I be here?" Eric wanted to ask why she came to pick him up. Elizabeth was currently only in charge of the film production department of 20th Century Fox. Although the Angel of the Apocalypse project was valued by Fox, it was not under her jurisdiction. However, Eric still shrugged. Well, the whole set was hers anyway. Forget it, I won't talk about it. Humph. Elizabeth snorted softly, but she leaned over and held Eric's hand intimately. She said, Dad asked me to talk to you about the digital release of the soundtrack album. Stop. Eric did not wait for Elizabeth to continue. He quickly interrupted her and said, Liz, I've spent too much effort convincing others these days. Let me take a break. Let's not talk about music today, okay? In order to obtain as much music content as possible, Eric formulated the strategy of delaying the release of digital music albums by traditional singers for 3 months. This plan would not only be implemented in the Firefly system, but it also greatly increased the possibility of introducing content from external record companies. However, Yahoo Music Store could not be full of old music content. In order to make up for this, the film and television soundtrack albums in the Firefly system would be released at the same time as the physical albums. Other than Firefly Group, MGM agreed to this plan almost without hesitation. However, Murdoch was not very satisfied with the proposal. However, it was difficult for 20th Century Fox to reject the proposal directly like other film companies. Even without mentioning the private relationship between Eric and Elizabeth, the close cooperation between Firefly Group and News Corporation over the years was even closer than that of MGM. The companies directly held by the two parties included Blue Sky Studio, FFM TV, and the Australian branch of Digital Domain. In addition, just like Eschatological Angel this time, the two companies cooperated frequently in the TV business. Outside of Hollywood, Yahoo Portal had also reached an agreement with News Corporation to enjoy exclusive online news publishing rights for many of News Corporation's media outlets. Elizabeth was also aware of this. The music business under News Corporation was even more insignificant than Firefly, so she did not feel the need to fight for it. Therefore, although she followed her father's instructions to bring up this matter, she did not intend to persuade Eric. Looking at the slightly tired face of the man beside her, Elizabeth nodded, but pretended to be unwilling to give up and deliberately said, Okay, then we'll talk tomorrow. Eric did not mind Elizabeth's stubborn personality. He smiled and the two of them walked into the administrative building on the set. Although Eric had given Doomsday Angel to Fox to take over the X-Files, everything still went through the proper business process. This sci-fi series was jointly invested by Firefly TV and Fox TV, in addition to one of Cameron's shell companies. The copyright of the TV series was owned by Fox, and Firefly only received a share of the profits based on their investment. Due to the miraculous success of Titanic, although it was only a TV series conceived by Cameron, the competition for the roles was still very fierce. From the very beginning, the production team had set very strict conditions for the female lead Max's audition. The age limit was between 18 to 22 years old, the height between 170 centimeters and 175 centimeters, and she had to have at least 3 years of acting experience. She also had a foundation in dancing, gymnastics, and other physical skills, so she could be suitable for high-intensity action scenes. But even with such harsh conditions, more than 300 girls passed the initial screening and participated in the audition. It was not difficult to see the strength of the UA film industry. The other secondary roles had been determined before, and today was the last round of auditions for the female lead. There were only 10 candidates left in the final round. Although all the girls had already arrived and were waiting in the lounge, the audition would not begin until 2:30. Cameron's mind was now mainly focused on the early special effects research and development of Spider-Man and the Titanic theme exhibition. Other than providing the main plot idea and a producer title, he did not participate in this project and did not come today. Eric listened to the Fox producer in charge of Doomsday Angel, Brian Spicer, briefly explain the early audition situation. He flipped through the 10 documents in his hand and said with great interest to Elizabeth, who was carefully reading the candidate's information, Liz, have you heard a story about an interview? The person in charge randomly pulled out a stack of information from the interviewees and threw it into the trash can, announcing that these people were eliminated. The reason was very simple. They were not lucky enough. Elizabeth raised her head and looked at Eric helplessly. She said, If you wanted to play like this, Why didn't you come earlier? There are only 10 people left now. If you pulled out a stack, there would be nothing left. Then I'll pull out 1 or 2, said Eric. He picked out 2 from the thin stack of information, drew a cross on it with a pencil, and handed it to Brian Spicer and the others, who were a little stunned. He said, "Get someone to inform them that they can leave directly." Elizabeth knew Eric well. She knew that Eric's inexplicable actions often had a reason. Although she could rarely get the reason from Eric, Elizabeth firmly believed in this. Elizabeth snatched the 2 pieces of information from Eric and looked at them. She did not find anything special, so she handed them to Brian Spicer. "Brian, is there a problem with these 2 people?" Brian Spicer took it and looked at it. He hesitated for a moment before telling the truth. "Liz, this girl named Mira Jovovich was introduced by Mr. Palma. However, I can guarantee that there is no problem with her qualifications. She has dancing skills, and she has been playing small roles in movies and TV series since the age of 13. Elizabeth thought for a while and asked, "Brian De Palma?" Brian Spicer nodded. Brian De Palma was a veteran film director in Hollywood. A few years ago, he had filmed the first Mission Impossible. Elizabeth did not care too much. After working for a few years, she gradually understood that Hollywood was a social circle. Moreover, she believed that Eric would not care about this. The problem might lie with the other girl. What about the other one? This Eli Lander. Brian Spicer looked at the name on the other piece of information and frowned slightly. He then looked at the other people in the audition room. Everyone shook their heads. One of them flipped through the information in front of him. He thought for a while and said, "This girl was selected by John's group. Should we call him to come over?" Brian Spicer looked at Elizabeth and Eric and explained, "John Knowles. We divided the preliminaries into 5 groups. John is the person in charge of the 3rd group." Elizabeth was about to say something when Eric took the 2 pieces of information from Brian Spicer and stuffed them into the folder. He shook his head and smiled. "Forget it. It's just that it's been a little troublesome recently. I don't want to always be the same. Well, let's pretend that nothing happened. Everyone, let's start." Although they did not understand what had happened, Brian Spicer and the others suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. Elizabeth's expression froze. She moved her chair, leaned over, and hugged Eric gently. Then, she pulled out the 2 pieces of information that had puzzled everyone. She said to Brian Spicer in an unquestionable tone, "Brian, tell them to leave." Brian Spicer took the 2 pieces of information again. He felt Elizabeth's firm tone and did not dare to say anything. He nodded, got up, and walked out of the room without hesitation. Elizabeth still did not let go of Eric. She ignored the other bystanders and intimately rubbed her face against Eric's cheek. She said, "Eric, do what you want to do. You don't have to explain to them." Eric gently patted Elizabeth's slender waist and smiled. "Why do I feel that this sentence came from the mouth of a girl?" Elizabeth was not angry at Eric mentioning Drew this time, but she still retorted, "I'm not like her. She's crazy. Oh, are you sure you're normal? You're a jerk." The onlookers pricked up their ears to eavesdrop on the 2 bosses' strange, or rather, words of love. But soon, Brian Spicer, who had just left, pushed open the door and walked in again, breaking the atmosphere. Eric and Elizabeth heard the footsteps and realized the situation around them. They sat separately as if nothing had happened. There were 8 girls left on the list that Eric was completely unfamiliar with. The audition began at 2:30 and ended at 7 o'clock in the evening. Due to the tight schedule, the pilot episode had to be produced before May. Eric did not hesitate too much. After the audition ended, everyone quickly discussed the results. A 19-year-old girl from Pennsylvania was lucky enough to get the role of the female lead, Mike. After the female lead of Doomsday Angel was confirmed, Eric would no longer be involved in the specific production of the TV series. On the afternoon of April Fool's Day, Eric flew from Los Angeles to Oakland, San Francisco. The official product launch of Firefly would be held at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on April 2nd. The venue was chosen in the Grand Ballroom of the Oakland Marriott International Hotel. After more than a month of intensive publicity, The Fireflyer's reputation had spread all over the world. However, other than its main purpose, there was still a lot of information about this player that hadn't been made public yet. Therefore, the launch attracted almost all the mainstream media from all over the world. After the date of the launch was confirmed, more than 600 media outlets contacted Firefly Electronics, hoping to get an invitation to the launch. In the Silicon Valley area, where technology companies gathered, although the electronics industry had already thoroughly disassembled the player, they would not miss the opportunity to get first-hand information. In addition to the lucky audience selected by Firefly Electronics through the Yahoo portal, the final guest list reached 2,100 people. Eric watched the preview of Firefly Electronics CEO, Bill Olson, last night and was busy until late at night. He woke up early today. Since the launch would be held at the Marriott Hotel, Eric chose to stay in this hotel. He left the room and walked into the hotel's internal restaurant. Chris was already sitting at a table with the two leaders of Firefly Electronics and Yahoo CEO, Ian Neer, who personally came from Boston. They were discussing something. "Good morning, Eric." Ian Neer, who was sitting across from Eric, waved at him when he saw him walking over. The others also looked over. Eric walked over and greeted everyone. He sat down next to Ian Neer and asked, "What are you guys talking about?" The few people looked at each other. Ian Neer took the initiative and said, "Eric, about the pricing strategy of Fireflyer." Eric asked the waiter for breakfast and said, "You guys aren't thinking about increasing the price, right?" Bill Olson said, "Eric, according to our recent research, $299 is the same price as the Sony Walkman. It is indeed a little too low. Based on Fireflyer's popularity, I think it is possible to increase the price to $359 or even $399. But we've discussed this issue many times." Eric shrugged and said, "We all know that the Fireflyer's technical level isn't very high. Even though we've already applied for a series of patents for the MP3 player, as long as our competitors want to work in this area, they can still create an alternative product. So what we need to do is to make Fireflyer popular as soon as possible and let it become the industry standard. We should not rush for profits from the start. Furthermore, the manufacturing cost of Fireflyer is only $150. With the increase in production and technology, the overall cost will continue to decrease. We already have enough profit margin." Firefly Electronics CEO, Victor Mike, shook his head and said, "Eric, your thinking is not wrong. But I think you have underestimated our technology and patent barriers. I am sure that even an electronics giant like Sony would need at least 3 years to bypass our patent barriers. 3 years is enough for us to complete our MP3 player strategy." Chapter 846. Eric remembered Elizabeth's whisper to him yesterday, and did not intend to explain too much. He made the final decision. Next year, Seagate will probably be able to launch a microhard drive with 2G capacity. At that time, we can appropriately increase the price of different models of Firefly, according to the capacity. Now and in the future, the bottom line of $299 cannot be changed. Victor, Mike, Nellie, and the others saw Eric frowning slightly. His expression was also a little more indisputable, which was rare in the past. They were very sensible and no longer argued. After breakfast, everyone went to visit Firefly Electronics' newly set up multi-touch capacitive screen laboratory. This was set up after Firefly Electronics acquired a small capacitive screen research and development company in recent months. Compared with the current mainstream resistive screens, capacitive screens undoubtedly had more advantages. This kind of screen was also proven to be the mainstream technology for future handheld mobile devices. Similar to 3D and IMAX in the film industry, capacitive screens and multi-touch technology had been around for many years, but there had been no mainstream electronic products to match them, so the development was slow. Eric believed that as long as the planned YahooPad tablet was launched, capacitive screens supporting multi-touch would soon become the mainstream touchscreens. At this time, Firefly Electronics could also gain more advantages in terms of technology patents. Approaching noon, there were only 3 hours left before the conference in the afternoon. More and more guests who planned to attend the conference began to gather at the Marriott Hotel. Amazon's CEO, Jeff Bezos, arrived in San Francisco in the morning. After 3 rounds of capital injections, Firefly Investments already owned 30% of Amazon's shares. Under the management of Jeff Bezos, Amazon had also developed rapidly in recent years. Although it had not completely occupied the position of overlord in online book sales, Jeff Bezos could not wait to start Amazon's development in the direction of a comprehensive online retailer. Firefly's online sales was Amazon's first attempt at business expansion. In order to show the importance of Amazon, Eric took time out at noon to have lunch with Jeff Bezos and discuss the next step of Amazon's development. After selling 30% of the shares to Firefly, in order to avoid losing control, Jeff Bezos did not intend to continue financing Firefly Investments and began to prepare for the IPO. Eric was not in a hurry to acquire more shares of Amazon. After all, Amazon's development had not been smooth sailing. There were still many opportunities for Firefly to invest in the future. The two of them were eating and chatting in the Marriott Hotel's restaurant when the CEO of Firefly Electronics, Bill Olson, suddenly walked into the restaurant in a hurry and headed straight for Eric. Bill Olson nodded at Jeff Bezos. Without any hesitation, he said to Eric in an urgent tone, "Eric, Celine Dion's manager, Rennie Angeli, just called. He said that Celine Dion won't be able to make it to the press conference this afternoon." Eric's mind spun, and he basically understood what had happened. Among the 5 major record companies, Sony was undoubtedly the one that felt the most threatened by the Firefly's launch. They also produced a variety of mainstream portable music players. Celine Dion happened to be a singer under Sony Music. Although Celine Dion's voice could be said to be heavenly, in fact, her personal music style was very simple. If it wasn't for the birth of My Heart Will Go On, it would have been almost impossible for Celine Dion to become a first-tier superstar in the music industry. Therefore, before the release of Titanic, Celine Dion could only be considered a second-tier singer under Sony Recordings. Although Celine Dion's status rose after the release of My Heart Will Go On, she was bound by the contract and could not have the freedom of superstars like Michael Jackson and Madonna. It was obvious that Sony Recordings was pressuring Celine Dion to not attend the Firefly's press conference. Eric hadn't expected that Sony would be so despicable as to put pressure on Celine Dion 2 hours before the press conference. Before he could say anything, Bill Olson's phone rang again. Bill Olson did not answer. He passed the phone to Eric and said, "Ms. Dion just said that she wants to apologize to you in person." Sony was the mastermind behind this matter. Although Eric was angry, he was not so petty as to vent his anger on Celine Dion. He picked up the phone and chatted with the other party for a while. Celine Dion knew the importance of My Heart Will Go On to promote her career. Therefore, she was very respectful to Eric on the phone. She repeatedly apologized and vaguely explained her difficulties. After chatting for a while, Eric hung up the phone. At this time, Chris, Victor, Mike, Nellie, and the others who heard the news also appeared in the restaurant. As this press conference would also announce the release of the Titanic soundtrack album on Yahoo Music Store, Celine Dion could be said to be the most important guest in the afternoon. Bill Olson purposely put her at the end of the press conference to announce the official release of the Titanic soundtrack album on behalf of Yahoo Music Store. Everyone hurriedly chatted for a while and left the restaurant together. They went to a meeting room specially prepared for Firefly Electronics at the Marriott Hotel to discuss countermeasures. Bill Olson looked at everyone and said, "It is too late to discuss with Madonna now. However, it is not too difficult to get the Backstreet Boys to praise one more song. It is just that if they go on stage, the following segment will be disrupted." There were originally 3 scheduled guests in the afternoon: Madonna Ciccone, the Backstreet Boys, and Celine Dion. Madonna was naturally not bound by the same restrictions as Celine Dion. Moreover, she had publicly expressed her intention to cooperate with Yahoo Music Store. Therefore, after receiving the invitation, she readily agreed. The Backstreet Boys were the pillars of Firefly Records. Firefly Electronics' press conference would naturally not leave them out. Celine Dion was also confirmed early on. However, no one expected that she would be pressured by Sony at the last minute and give up the performance. Everyone had seen the preview of the press conference last night. Naturally, they knew that if they replaced her at the last minute, the details of the announcement of the original album of Titanic on Yahoo Music Store would have to be changed. After discussing for a while, Chris suddenly looked at Eric and said, "Eric, since Celine Dion can't go on stage, you will do it yourself. You are the songwriter of My Heart Will Go On. You have also seen the preview of the press conference last night. There should be no problem." Eric didn't even have time to shake his head before everyone started cheering excitedly. "That's right, Eric. You're going to do it yourself. Your status is much higher than Celine Dion's." In fact, during the planning stage of the press conference, Bill Olsen had hoped that Eric would go on stage to give a speech. However, Eric had rejected the idea. Now that Chris had suddenly suggested it, they were naturally very excited. As the soul of Firefly's system, Eric was surrounded by a series of halos. As long as he went on stage, his influence on the media would definitely be far beyond Celine Dion's performance. Eric reached out and pressed down on the noisy crowd. He smiled helplessly and said, "You are not asking me to go on stage and sing My Heart Will Go On, right? Is that appropriate?" Bill Olsen said, "Of course not, Eric. You can say whatever you want and do whatever you want. Then you can help announce the digital album of My Heart Will Go On for sale." Victor McNally, who was not very good with words, also agreed excitedly, "Yes, yes, yes, that's it." Ian Neer also smiled and played the emotional card. "Eric, I think you definitely don't want this press conference to be ruined. Moreover, this is your responsibility. The whole of Firefly is yours." Facing everyone's eager eyes, Eric hesitated for a moment and nodded slightly. He said, "Okay, then let's discuss what I should say when the time comes." Bill Olsen shook his head and smiled. "Oh, Eric, this is your business. We won't be participating. I should go and greet the guests." Victor McNally simply stood up. The vice president of Best Buy is still waiting for me downstairs." "Haha, Jeff just said that he wanted me to discuss with him about Amazon's advertisement on Yahoo. I'll go down first." Seeing Bill Olsen, Victor McNally, and Ian Neer leave the conference room, Eric turned to Chris. Chris smiled and spread his hands. "I haven't thought of an excuse yet. Forget it, I'll just do whatever I want when the time comes. Even if I mess it up, no one will dare to say anything to me, the boss." Eric simply shrugged and asked about other things. "How are the preparations for your wedding with Emily?" Hearing Eric mention this topic, Chris had a bitter look on his face. "It's still the same. My dad and her parents are much more enthusiastic than us." Eric looked at Chris and could almost imagine the three elders chasing after Chris and Emily to discuss the wedding details. He smiled and joked, "I'll be going to New York for a week or two. Maybe I can give you some ideas. Don't add to the trouble." Chris shook his head and curiously asked, "In 2 weeks, other than Kevin and Shesha's birthdays, do you have anything else to do?" Eric nodded and said, "Regarding the establishment of Marvel Pictures, Avi Allard and the rest have already come up with a preliminary plan. I need to confirm it personally." Chris occasionally heard Eric mention the huge plan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He had too many things to pay attention to, so he did not express much interest in this matter. The two chatted casually for a while before leaving the conference room together. After 12 o'clock, more than half of the guests had gathered in the banquet hall of the Marriott Hotel. The rest of the guests were also arriving one after another. Eric studied the specific plan of the press conference before throwing himself into the activities of welcoming the guests. Eric naturally did not need to personally entertain the media reporters from all over the world. However, he still needed to personally greet the technology giants in the IT industry. As time passed, Microsoft's Bill Gates, Cisco's John Chambers, Oracle's Larry Ellison, Apple's newly appointed CEO, Gil Amelio, and other IT industry executives, as well as Seagate, Best Buy's electrical appliance chain stores, and other partners' executives, appeared one after another. Even Warren Buffett specially rushed over from Omaha. In addition to these technology and investment industry giants, There was naturally no lack of entertainment industry stars who were invited to support the press conference. Katzenberg personally arrived at the Marriott Hotel an hour before the press conference began. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, all the guests had already gathered in the banquet hall. The lights in the other parts of the hall dimmed, leaving only a few beams of light gathered on the stage. As the CEO of Firefly Electronics, Victor McNally was the first to walk on stage. He announced the start of the press conference and gave a simple speech to all the guests present. In Eric's original suggestion, he did not want the press conference to be too long. Therefore, the entire press conference was expected to be only 1.5 hours long. It mainly included the configuration and functions of Firefly and the introduction of the Yahoo Music Store, as well as the introduction of sales methods and channels. Bill Olson had prepared for this press conference for 2 months. Therefore, everything was carried out in an orderly manner. As Bill Olson and the others announced the details of Firefly, Yahoo Music Store, and other details, the guests at the banquet hall applauded and cheered. The camera flashes in the hands of the reporters did not stop at all. During this period, countless media outlets had already exposed a large amount of information about Firefly. However, the final official announcement was undoubtedly the most newsworthy. When Amazon's CEO Jeff Bezos went on stage to introduce the establishment of Amazon Firefly, Bill Olson, who was the host himself, went on stage again amidst the applause. He was even holding a chair in his hand. The atmosphere at the press conference had been quite lively. Bill Olson's strange action easily caused the guests to chuckle softly. Bill Olson put down the chair and patted the back of the chair. However, he did not sit down as everyone expected. Instead, he raised the microphone in his hand and said with a smile, "This chair is not prepared for me. Guess who will sit here?" Naturally, there were not many people in the banquet hall who could make the CEO of Firefly Electronics carry a chair himself. Very quickly someone shouted out, "Eric Williams! Eric Williams! Eric Williams!" As the voices became louder and louder, Bill Olson did not keep them in suspense. He raised the microphone in his hand and said, "Then please welcome Mr. Eric Williams." Amidst the warm applause and cheers, Eric walked up the stairs to the stage from the side. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.